Chapter 356. The water body was still vast and boundless as far as the eye could see. Gu Fei's boat was being chased by the city guards. In front of them, they were about to meet the pirates. It seemed like they were being attacked from both sides, but the three of them were overjoyed. The boat was truly riding the wind and breaking the waves. Needless to say, the guards were swimming. No matter how fast they swam, they couldn't compare to the boat. As for the pirates in front of them, the distance between them and the boat was getting shorter and shorter. At this moment, these guys could clearly see the approaching boat. They all suspected that their eyes were playing tricks on them. The players of Waterside City weren't unfamiliar with this type of boat. Throughout the year, there were only a few boats docked at Waterside City's pier. Players couldn't control them, and they weren't involved in any quests. They had never set foot in the water before. But now, the boat had suddenly left the shore, and had even sailed so far away. These guys couldn't figure out what was going on. Could it be that we've bumped into some mysterious quest? These guys were actually having sweet dreams. But no matter what, the boat was heading straight for them. They couldn't be rammed by it. The 5 boats hurriedly dodged to the side. They're scattering. On the observation deck, Boundless Mang Mang observed with her binoculars as she shouted at Shi Xiaotian. Direction? Shi Xiaotian yelled. Turn left by about 10 degrees. Boundless Mang Mang replied. Understood. Shi Xiaotian replied loudly. Shi Xiaotian controlled the boat to change direction. But she was only a newbie. How could she accurately say 10 degrees? Moreover, Boundless Mang Mang wasn't a professional surveyor. Her estimate of 10 degrees was very exaggerated. Thus, after turning around, Boundless Mang Mang immediately yelled, It's too much. Turn back a bit more. Shi Xiaotian hurriedly turned back while asking loudly, How is it? How is it? Standing at the bow of the boat, Gu Fei watched as the 2 girls yelled loudly, causing the boat to sway left and right as if it was about to fall apart. The pirates also saw the sailboat suddenly tremble left and right. For a moment, they couldn't understand what was going on. Just as they were wondering if this was some sort of super quest, the black-robed mage at the bow of the ship clearly appeared before their eyes. It's that guy! Almost everyone let out this cry. They didn't have a good impression of the dhow. They were just curious as to how the mage managed to get his hands on the dhow. After all, these pirates had been drooling over these dhow for a long time. From the looks of it, the players still had a way to get their hands on this ship. Even at a time like this, these guys were still thinking about it. Shi Xiaotian was already charging toward them with a menacing aura. Although it didn't directly collide with a boat, the difference between an ant and an elephant was like the difference between an ant and an elephant. A small bump from the side was enough to flip a boat over. Well done. The vast Mang Mang gave Shi Xiaotian a thumbs up. At this time, the waves created by the sailboat were enough to cause the boats that hadn't been hit to shake violently. 3 people lost their balance and fell into the water before they could grab hold of anything. Shi Xiaotian continued to control the sailboat, hitting people as well as boats. These pirates had always bullied the weak on the water. Today, they finally met someone stronger. They couldn't do anything even if they were bullied by the sailboat. The vast Mang 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 stood on the observation deck and gave orders blindly. Shi Xiaotian controlled the boat to turn in circles. After messing around, not a single one of the pirates could stand on the boat. The luckier ones were still able to hold onto the boat after falling into the water. The unluckier ones had long since been swept away by the waves created by the sailboat. At this time, the fearless guards had also caught up. However, when faced with the waves created by Shi Xiaotian, they couldn't control their bodies. The waves sent them flying everywhere. The people who fell into the water were in a miserable state. The 3 people on the sailboat were also in a sorry state. Shi Xiaotian was a newbie. How could a boat change directions so frequently? Though the waves caused a great deal of trouble for the men in the water, their vessel suffered a great deal as well. And because of the size of the vessel, the extent of the rocking was even more dreadful. Even though Gu Fei had trained hard in his lower body skills, there was always a limit to everything. At this time, his sense of balance could no longer keep him steady. After a moment of carelessness, he slipped and became a glider on the deck. He rolled left and right, and from time to time he even rolled forward and backward. In the driver's seat, Shi Xiaotian had a different look. At first, she held on tightly to the rudder, but in the end, she accidentally let go during one of the violent shakes. She was knocked around in the steering cabin, and her head was dizzy. But the most miserable thing was still the vast expanse of grass. She was standing high up on the observation deck, but one time when the ship shook, she was thrown out. Fortunately, the girl reacted quickly and reached out to the observation deck. At this time, her body was swaying along with the ship, and she was struggling to hold on. What was worse was that this situation did not seem to have an end. Don't forget that the ship was constantly moving on its own with an unknown mysterious force. At this time, Shi Xiaoyan's rudder was pointing in an unknown direction. In short, the ship kept shaking and spinning in the same place, and the more it shook, the more it shook. Gu Fei slid from the left side of the deck to the right side, from the bow to the stern. At a glance, it seemed that if this continued, the sailboat would no longer be a sailboat, and it would capsize. At this time, the most important thing was, of course, to stabilize the rudder and control it to the right position. Of course, there was no hope for the vast expanse of grass on the observation deck. It would be good if she could take care of herself and not fly to some unknown corner. Controlling the rudder, of course, depended on Shi Xiaotian, who was still playing the human bumper car in the driver's seat. As Gu Fei continued to glide on the deck, he craned his neck to look in the direction of the driver's seat. He thought to himself that this girl was confused because of the collision, and he should think of a way to take measures. At one time, when he passed by the door of the driver's seat, Gu Fei was about to shout a warning, but in the end, he saw Shi Xiaoyan's figure fly out of the door with a whoosh, and the two of them collided. After the two of them flew out horizontally, before they could say a word, the ship tilted in a certain direction, and the two of them slid out again, one in front of the other, one behind the other. Seeing that there was no hope for this girl, Gu Fei had to rely on himself in the end. After sliding left and right for a few rounds, Gu Fei finally had an opportunity to pass by the driver's seat. Gu Fei had been waiting for this moment. Looking at the right opportunity, he teleported, and in a flash, he was already in the driver's seat. But even so, his body was not very stable, and after entering the driver's seat, he was still floating. But Gu Fei's skills were much better than Shi Xiaoyan's. With a stretch of his arm, he had already grabbed the rudder, straightened his waist, stretched out his legs, and stepped on the other side of the wall, and his body was horizontal in the air. Awesome! At this time, Gu Fei heard a shout. Looking out, he saw Shi Xiaotian giving him a thumbs up, and he had just swept past the deck in front of the driver's seat. Looking at the current shaking of the sailboat, Gu Fei really did not know which direction was the right one to turn the rudder, and he did not dare to make a move. But at this time, Gu Fei had already stabilized the rudder, and the sailboat continued to shake with the waves, and finally had a stable direction to move forward. In this way, as long as he persevered, the situation would be much better. Gu Fei jumped back to the ground by stepping on the wall, and continued to hold the rudder firmly with both hands. After judging that the bow seemed to be rotating to the left, he began to slowly turn the rudder in the opposite direction, bit by bit. The sailboat finally moved in a straight line, and as it sailed away from the area where the waves were blooming, the shaking became lighter and lighter. On the deck, Shi Xiaotian finally stopped gliding and carefully stood up. After falling around for so long, although he did not die, it was inevitable that he was a little dizzy. In the driver's seat, Gu Fei did not dare to relax his grip on the rudder. He watched as Shi Xiaotian got up and staggered forward on the deck until he reached the mast of the bow and began to climb up. After climbing to the observation deck, he pulled up the vast mang that was still hanging there. The two girls sat on the observation deck, gasping for breath. At this time, they did not even have the strength to shout, so they sent a message to Gu Fei. "How is it?" "It's okay, it's under control," replied Gu Fei. The boat was getting steadier and steadier. "Where are the others?" Gu Fei asked the two on the observation deck. Then he saw Mang, who was in the vast expanse of the observation deck, stand up shakily, raise his binoculars, and look around. "I don't know. I can't see it. Who knows where the waves have pushed them to?" The man replied in a vast and boundless manner. In her field of vision through the binoculars, she finally found 2 floating boats. Let's take advantage of this time to go ashore. Where is the land? Gu Fei asked. 40 degrees to the left. The boundless wilderness began again. I'll drive. Xiao Tian seemed to have developed feelings for sailing. Don't, you should rest for a while. Gu Fei still had lingering fears about the situation just now. After the sailboat turned around, it moved forward steadily. After carefully observing the vast and boundless surroundings, he said with certainty, I really can't see anyone. Forget about the players, the NPC guards definitely know where we are. They'll probably catch up soon. Xiao Tian said. What's there to chase? How can they swim as fast as the boat? They'll only get further and further away. Gu Fei said. Gu Fei welcomed this situation. This way, he would have the time to wash away these annoying PKs. The sailboat headed straight for the land, and nothing else happened. The shore of Waterside City was like a beach, with fine sand. The sun shone down, and unique aquatic monsters roamed the shore. Whether it was killing monsters or relaxing, this was a good place. It was considered a gathering place for players in Waterside City. Although it was almost dawn, there were still quite a few people. When they saw a dhow getting closer and closer, everyone's eyes widened. Just like the pirates, they recognized this boat. It was the same boat that hadn't moved for tens of thousands of years. Is it some kind of special mission? Everyone excitedly gathered at the shore, facing the sailing ship. In the control room of the boat, Gu Fei stuck his head out and asked the 2 girls, Do you know how to stop the boat? Chapter 357. More and more players gathered on the shoreline. Everyone stared at the approaching triangular sailboat with wide eyes. If they knew that the pilot of the boat had not found a way to stop the boat, they would definitely regret their decision to watch. Reality was often cruel. Gu Fei did not find anything in the cabin that looked like a break. After asking the 2 girls, he naturally did not get any answers. Helpless, Gu Fei could only choose to change direction as much as possible and not charge directly into the players on the shoreline. Xiao Tian and Boundless Meng also took measures. The 2 stood high up on the observation deck and waved at the players, gesturing for them to move. 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 The crowd on the shoreline was very excited. With the sound of the waves and the wind, no one could hear the 2's shouts. However, the 2's ferocious appearance attracted a lot of attention. After everyone's attention was focused on them, a sharpshooter with a pair of eagle eyes immediately shouted, Beauties! To someone added, What's going on? Everyone fought to be the first to ask. The strong curiosity aroused an even stronger reaction from the crowd. Not only did no one move away, everyone took a few steps forward. Some people even stepped into the water fearlessly. After realizing that the sailboat was trying to change direction, everyone became even more vigilant. The boat is going to run. Everyone pointed at the boat and chased after the direction that Gu Fei had deliberately avoided. This was in accordance with the old saying, Heaven's evil can be defied, but man's evil cannot be avoided. Gu Fei could no longer change direction. If he did, he would have to turn around and leave the shoreline. Seeing the players' enthusiasm, Gu Fei felt that if he turned around and left, they would be even more disappointed. Therefore, he did not care anymore. He walked out of the cabin and shouted at the 2 girls on the observation deck, Hey, hurry up and get ready to run. We will definitely be surrounded later. Gu Fei had a lot of experience being surrounded, so he had good judgment. In this situation, no matter what happened to the boat, it would definitely be surrounded. I'm coming. Xiao Tian was the first to climb down. Gu Fei urged. It was a vast expanse of grass, but he didn't know what he was doing up there. Almost there. Vast Meng responded. Gu Fei saw her waving her arms with all her might, and then she jumped down from the observation deck. Bang! After landing on the ground, Meng bared his teeth and cast a healing spell on himself. Gu Fei saw that she was holding something in her left hand. When he took a closer look, he was speechless. This girl had actually removed the telescope from the observation deck. Let's go! At this time, Xiaoan also climbed down, and the 2 of them ran to the stern together. After a few steps, they saw Gu Fei standing still. Hurry up! Jump down and swim ashore. Do you want to be surrounded? The two of them came up to pull Gu Fei. Don't. Gu Fei was rarely nervous. I don't know how to swim. But I can teleport. Gu Fei calmly added, so you guys should go. The two girls didn't delay any longer and hurried to the stern. At this point, they could already feel that the water was getting shallower and the buoyancy was insufficient. The bottom of the boat was starting to bump. If they dilly-dallied for a while before diving, they would plunge into the mud. Although Gu Fei didn't plan to dive, he followed the two to the stern. The two girls, one on the left and the other on the right, flew directly into the water. The surface of the water stirred up surging waves. Soon, their heads popped out of the water and waved at Gu Fei. At this time, the hull was shaking more and more violently. A boat was indeed a boat. After touching the land, it was not as stable as on the water. Gu Fei grabbed the railing with one hand and waved at the two girls with the other. The two swam to the other side. On the deck, Gu Fei was holding the railing and swaying, and the players at the lower ground couldn't see him. At this time, the onlookers were actively discussing the two beautiful girls on the observation deck. Why did one of them suddenly climb down and the other jump down? But among these players who were waiting for the sailboat to approach, some of them found that the boat didn't seem quite right. How could such a big boat stop? For a moment, Gu Fei and the others didn't think about it, but there were people among these players who understood how to stop. Drop the anchor. Therefore, sharp-eyed marksmen were the first to discover that the anchor of the boat was still hanging on the side of the boat. It had no intention of dropping it, and at this time, the boat was not far from the shore. The experienced sailor players had already determined that the boat was in a state of being stranded and was only continuing to dash forward with inertia. Therefore, after someone let out a strange cry, many people had already begun to run away. But there were always a few slow thinkers who were still looking up at the observation deck, thinking about the two beautiful girls just now and thinking about the meaning of their actions. What were they hinting at by jumping and climbing? Therefore, the more profound their thinking, the more miserable they were in the end. It was just that those who were knocked over by the boat were considered lucky. The most pitiful were those who were directly crushed under the boat. The soft sand made it possible for this to happen. At first, no one realized this. Everyone surrounded the stopped boat in amazement. Then, a few people rushed out from the crowd, screaming and banging on the bottom of the boat. After asking around, they found out that their friends were crushed under the boat and were frantically sending text messages for help. Wow! They won't die like this? Everyone was amazed. Yes, this is amazing. A black-robed mage in the crowd of players also exclaimed in amazement. A few players beside him looked at this person with a surprised expression. They clearly didn't remember this person at this place just now. Stop watching, quickly think of a solution. The black-robed mage said as he squeezed out of the crowd, seemingly to think of a solution. Compared to the few poor people under the boat, more players were actually concerned about the two beautiful girls on the observation deck. It wasn't that he was lustful to such an extent. In fact, it was because there were two such living creatures on this miraculous boat. If this was some sort of quest, these two living creatures would definitely be an important clue. Some of the players were researching how to dig up the soil to rescue the players who were crushed under the boat. Most of them were researching how to climb up the several meters high deck. After the black-robed mage squeezed out of the crowd, he went to an inconspicuous corner and turned back to look. After waiting for a moment, he finally saw two girls sneaking out from the other side of the boat. The black-robed mage was naturally Gu Fei. No one knew that he was on the boat, so he used teleportation to directly flash into the crowd and pretend to be a bystander. This might cause some people to be surprised, but Gu Fei concluded that even if these people were surprised, they wouldn't be able to link him with the boat. After going around in a circle, Gu Fei and the two girls met up. Naturally, the two of them were dripping wet and looked very disheveled. Xiao Tian put on her cloak again, causing her face to be covered in a shadow. She urged the two to hurry. Waterside City was surrounded by a large body of water, but it wasn't as unique as Shady Forest City. It was just a castle on an island. After entering the city gate, the architecture of the city was very ordinary. I'm going to wash up. Gu Fei said goodbye to the two girls. I'm going to polish this telescope again. The telescope had forcibly broken the connection between it and the observation deck. At this moment, the broken part was uneven, and it felt very bad. See you later. Shi Xiaotian didn't say what she was going to do. The three of them turned around under the city gate. Gu Fei grabbed a person to ask for directions to the wanted quest office. In the vast wilderness, he asked a player where the general store was. Shi Xiaoying had already run far away with her head down. The three of them were already busy with their own matters, but the trouble they caused wasn't over yet. The players on the shore were frantically busy. They dug holes and built ladders. After a series of tosses and turns, the sailboat that was stuck in the sand lost its balance and fiercely collapsed. This time, it was very sudden. In the end, the players that were originally at the bottom of the boat were rescued. However, even more players that were at the side of the boat were smashed onto the beach. This time, some of them even lost their lives. At the same time, everyone discovered that the boat was empty. Was it a supernatural event? Everyone was indescribably shocked. Everyone pondered, studied, and investigated. This time, the first to discover it were the sharpshooters with eagle eyes. They pointed at the water again. Look, what is that? Thus, all the sharpshooters began to exclaim in surprise. The other players anxiously scratched their ears and cheeks. Finally, when everyone could clearly see it, a new round of discussion began. Why were there so many waterfront city guards swimming over? This matter was truly worthy of research. What kind of mission is this? Such a grand display. Everyone was very excited. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the first guard walked onto the shore. Everyone resisted the urge to applaud, their gazes closely following the guard's every move. In reality, the guard didn't do anything special. It just changed from swimming to running. The surrounding players were completely ignored by it. It continued to run forward as if there was no one around. Some players wanted to stop it and ask questions, but it ended up stepping on their bodies as it walked past. This was the highest realm of disregard. The second, third, fourth. More and more guards came ashore from this place. If they were related to the previous boat, they didn't even glance at it. Everyone acted in the same manner. They went ashore and ran. If someone blocked their way, they would directly step on them. There were still guards swimming over. The first guard that came ashore had already entered the main city. What was the meaning of this? Countless people were thinking so hard that their brains were about to explode. Should they chase after the first guard and take a look, or should they continue to wait and see what else would come ashore? This was too difficult a choice. Gu Fei, who didn't know that he had just arrived and caused so much trouble for the players, had already successfully completed 2 waves of missions. He had just received a PK value of 2. After completing this mission, his PK value would once again fall below 30. Chapter 358. Gu Fei, who had accepted the quest to get rid of his 30 PK points, was in a good mood. He was prepared to go offline immediately after completing this quest. This was something to be happy about. To be honest, Gu Fei was having a great time playing the game. In the game, he had the opportunity to fight with Kung Fu that he would never have in his daily life, and Gu Fei enjoyed the experience very much. However, he had always been very careful about moderation. In fact, with his work and his habits, he could definitely spare more time to play the game, but he never did so. He had always been very serious, only playing the game for 2 to 3 hours a day, enjoying the fun of Kung Fu fights before logging off. However, ever since he joined the guild quest, Gu Fei had repeatedly broken the time he had set for himself to log off. But this was also a helpless thing. The world of the game naturally had its rules, and sometimes they had to be obeyed. Otherwise, even in this virtual world, it would be difficult to survive. Gu Fei couldn't help but think of a saying: people in the pugilistic world cannot do as they please. He wasn't in the pugilistic world yet, it was just a stupid game, and there were some things that he was forced to do. For example, if he didn't take advantage of the moment when the guards were scattered at sea to get rid of his PK points and log off like he did yesterday, then come back the next day, Gu Fei didn't believe that he would be so lucky that there would always be bystanders who would save him every time. After experiencing being chased by the guards today to get rid of his PK points, Gu Fei knew very well that if it wasn't for the bystanders, he wouldn't have been able to get rid of his PK points. So this time, he couldn't take the risk again. He had to take advantage of the opportunity in front of him to get his PK points below 30. With such determination, Gu Fei once again delayed the time for him to go offline. The new quest that he had just received would drop his PK points to 29, which was considered a safe line for Gu Fei. He whistled, looked at the coordinates of the quest, and pushed open the door of the wanted quest office. A gust of wind blew. It was the strongest gust Gu Fei had felt since he entered the game. At that moment, Gu Fei unleashed the strongest kung fu energy he had ever displayed since he entered the game. The decision he made to dodge the gust of wind did not go through his brain. It was an instinctive reflex of his body. This was a conditioned reflex that Gu Fei practiced martial arts in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, and even in his dreams. This reflexive memory seemed to be imprinted in every inch of Gu Fei's skin, every inch of his bones, every inch of his meridians. Thus, at this critical moment, this kind of experience played a powerful role. In that instant, Gu Fei didn't even know he had reacted in such a way. His reaction was fast enough, absolutely fast. Unfortunately, no matter how fast one's reaction was, there was still a difference between a sudden attack and a prepared one. Other than that, there was another reason. Gu Fei's movements didn't speed up because of his reflexes. There was nothing he could do. Because this was a game, and the speed of one's movements was always a kind of data. The reaction of the brain, or the experience of the body, could only allow one to react as quickly as possible. However, this was actually just a preparatory action. To actually perform and complete this action, one needed data. Gu Fei's data was actually not considered slow, but in this sudden attack, he was still slightly slower in the face of this gust of wind. Even though his body made extraordinary judgment and reactions, it didn't help him dodge all of it. He only dodged part of it. Dodging part of it meant that part of it was also hit, so the damage was also part of it. Gu Fei lost his balance, but he didn't fall down. As long as it was possible, Gu Fei would never fall down. This time he could. Although after this gust of wind, Gu Fei's health was already in the red, he still managed to stabilize himself after staggering a few steps. The second gust of wind arrived. This time, Gu Fei was prepared. Moreover, his reflexes didn't slow down at all, so this time, he dodged the attack. At the same time, he saw the attacker clearly, the system guard. The system guard was indeed as strong as Gu Fei thought. These two attacks were just normal attacks, but the speed and strength were all at a level that Gu Fei had never seen before in the game. This kind of attack was even more difficult to deal with than the skill Earth-Splitting Slash. The Earth-Splitting Slash had to fly, land, and make a pose. How much time was wasted in the process? In comparison, the damage and attack range of a normal attack were certainly not as powerful as a skill like Earth-Splitting Slash, but they were clean, neat, and accurate. The simplest moves were often the most effective. This was a term that was often mentioned in Kung Fu, and it was actually reflected in this system guard. However, Gu Fei was an expert, and he still saw through the mystery behind it. A mere robot couldn't possibly display such a profound level of Kung Fu. There was only one reason for this. The difference in strength between the system guard and Gu Fei was too great. When the difference was too great, complicated moves would seem redundant. Perhaps they would be just as effective in terms of damage, but from the perspective of efficiency, they would always be inferior to simple moves. This complicated thought only flashed in Gu Fei's mind for an instant, because the opponent's third attack had arrived. One slash, another slash, and another slash. These were the three attacks that the system guard made against Gu Fei. Except for the first one, which was too sudden for Gu Fei to guard against, Gu Fei successfully dodged the last two attacks. After seeing the situation clearly, he was a little elated. There was only one guard in front of him. It wasn't hard for Gu Fei to understand what was going on. When there was a storm on the sea, who could predict where they would be swept to? Then, they would rush to the same place from different places. There was always a sequence. This brother in front of him had arrived first, but his comrades might still be drifting on the sea. He might have a way to deal with the lone guard. Gu Fei was full of confidence and didn't consider that his health was already red and that he would die in front of such a powerful guard. The guard's fourth slash came. It was still a straight slash. Saint Seiya often said, "It's useless to use the same move against us twice." Although Gu Fei wasn't a Saint Seiya, this was already the fourth slash he had faced. The moment the opponent raised his hand, Gu Fei had already made a counterattack. The sword slashed down, and a gust of wind swept past, but Gu Fei had already dodged to the side. Dual flame flash. Gu Fei slashed down heavily. With a clang, Gu Fei's sword slashed down on the guard's shield, just like the first time he attacked this group of guards. Against such a fierce attack, their reaction speed definitely wouldn't be slow. Gu Fei didn't even pause his attack. With a quick flick of his wrist, his sword slashed down from the shield. By the side of the shield, his sword had turned into a stab, stabbing straight for the system guard's waist. Dodge! Gu Fei finally finished chanting. There was a certain amount of time between the summoning incantation and the activation incantation. Normal ranged mages didn't have much of a reaction to this setting, but for a melee mage like Gu Fei, this setting made his attacks even more unpredictable. Kung Fu moves were not as simple as a system guard slash. Every technique had multiple variations and follow-up moves, and humans didn't think in a straight line like computers, so there was no need to say how strange these techniques were. For example, when Gu Fei hit the guard just now, he had used a simple variation in this sword technique to deceive the guard's shield, and then found an opening to attack the guard's vitals. At the same time, he released the incantation, and a powerful attack was perfectly executed. When the guard was hit, it angrily turned around and slashed again, but Gu Fei had already dodged to the side. He had already stretched out his left hand, and lightning flashed in his hand. Lightning palm. Up until now, Gu Fei hadn't seriously used this skill in a real battle. This skill was to condense a bolt of lightning in the palm, and then strike it out in a straight line. To put it simply, it could be seen as a bolt of lightning that was fired in parallel. However, apart from the direction in which it was launched, this skill still had some unique characteristics. For example, it had to be released from the palm with one's bare hands. However, if the mage put away his staff and released the spell with his bare hands, the damage of the spell would be greatly reduced. Taking this into consideration, the system gave this skill a special condition: the secondary hand couldn't use it. In addition, this skill had another characteristic: the lightning needed some time to condense in the palm. This characteristic somewhat went against the quick and direct nature of lightning spells, so the power of this skill was slightly stronger than normal lightning spells. However, this was not an overpowered skill that could destroy the heavens and the earth. In fact, as a reward from the system's mission for players around level 40, this skill was not that amazing, and there were also such skill scrolls on the market. However, any magic skill had to be reconstructed in the hands of Gu Fei. For example, although this lightning palm was also a long-range attack, it was used in close combat during practice. After condensing the lightning, he grasped the timing and struck out with his palm. Gu Fei's skills were not limited to various types of weapons. He was also proficient in many palm techniques, fist techniques, and leg techniques. To him, striking someone with his palm was as simple and accurate as slashing someone with his sword. Therefore, the moment he struck, he released the lightning palm. Having the ability to attack from a distance did not mean that its power would be reduced in the slightest at close range. In the process of Gu Fei's research, he had already killed countless monsters with his palm. Gu Fei's use of the skill gave it a new value. His main hand was the double flame flash of the Night Stream sword, and his secondary hand was the lightning palm. This meant that as a melee mage, Gu Fei also had the mastery of both hands, just like a berserker. Moreover, the attack of his secondary hand was not weakened at all. Chapter 359. Gu Fei's left hand's lightning palm was fully formed. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled as his palm struck the guard's waist. Lightning spells were always so powerful. With a flash of lightning, Gu Fei felt that it would be a waste if the guard didn't fall on the spot. Of course, the guard wouldn't fall so easily. He suddenly turned around and slashed at Gu Fei. Gu Fei dodged, and just as he was about to counterattack, the guard used a skill. It was this skill that made Gu Fei feel that there was no point in challenging the guard and that he had no chance of winning. This was a skill that Gu Fei had seen before, and it came from an extremely despicable person. Holy Heal. In the mercenary competition, Silver Moon had used this skill against the Silver Moon mercenaries. It was a skill that paladins obtained after reaching level 40 and becoming paladins. The effect of this skill was the same as the priest's heal, but there were still some differences. The priest's heal didn't differentiate between friends and foes. Whether it was used on themselves or others, the effect was the same. On the other hand, the paladin's holy heal was most effective when used on themselves, followed by other paladins. When used on players of other professions, the effect would be greatly reduced. After testing it, he discovered that the holy healing spell had no effect on the two advanced professions, assassins and lurkers. As for the dark knights and night priests, it was a spell with great destructive power. There were so many variables to a skill, and holy heal was the most powerful one at the moment. After the guard turned around and slashed at nothing, he raised his shield, and a white light spread out from the shield and sprinkled down. The shape and posture were different from players, but anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this was a healing skill. How was Gu Fei supposed to fight this? Against the Wargen, Gu Fei could still use fire baptism to stop it from regenerating, but this guard had a healing skill. Interrupt? With this thought in mind, Gu Fei tried to attack again. After 2 waves of successful magic attacks, the guard was obviously going to recover. Gu Fei hurriedly stabbed out with his sword. According to the system's rules, regeneration was a continuous skill. If the caster was hit during the casting process, the skill could be interrupted. Gu Fei's slash was very fast. If the opponent allowed him to hit, then the skill would be interrupted at the beginning of its activation. This couldn't be any better. In the end, the guard used his shield to block Gu Fei's sword while he raised his sword above his head with his other hand. A holy white light spread out from the sword and sprinkled down. When Gu Fei's sword floated past the shield and stabbed into its body, the guard had clearly received the baptism of the white light and did not lack any blood. I'm impressed. Gu Fei gave the guard a thumbs up and turned to run. When the system started acting like a rascal, there was really nothing he could do. This spell seemed to have the power of a priest's heal and the speed of a paladin's holy heal. Gu Fei really wanted to spit on its face to see if he could interrupt it. In any case, Gu Fei was still treated like a god by the audience around him. Facing a powerful system guard, he could fight so many rounds, hit the guard several times, and force the guard to use regeneration twice. Where did this great immortal come from? As the players thought this, they didn't expect Gu Fei to suddenly stop fighting and turn to run. The players were instantly in a bad mood. They thought he was a hero, but it turned out he had a lousy ending. Gu Fei dashed across the street, and the guard followed closely behind. Gu Fei was also in a bad mood. He had used up all his mana without any regard for the consequences. He hated the system for having such a shameless regeneration skill. If he had known this would happen, he would have at least kept the potential of teleportation. They were less than 3 meters apart, and the guard seemed to be getting closer to him with every step, which wasn't easy to deal with. At this moment, Gu Fei missed the onlookers, but when he saw that the players who had been watching him fight with the guard were now looking at him with disdain, Gu Fei knew that he couldn't count on this unexpected soldier. Moreover, he didn't even know where the offline zone was. If he ran around randomly, he would definitely be caught by the system guards. At this moment, the wanted quest that he had just received became Gu Fei's last hope. Gu Fei was almost burning incense as he activated the wind-chasing emblem to check the coordinates. He was overjoyed when he connected the dots. It wasn't far, not far at all. It seemed that he would meet it at the entrance of the street ahead. Gu Fei charged forward, and after a few steps, a person walked out from the entrance of the street. He had a number above his head, but he didn't walk towards Gu Fei. Instead, he turned around and walked in the same direction as Gu Fei. Gu Fei saw that it would take some time, and looked behind him. It was too dangerous, so he had to take the risk. Gu Fei made up his mind and shouted, "The brother in front, wait." There were countless brothers in front of him, and when they heard the shout, they all turned around, but didn't see anyone they knew. On the other hand, Gu Fei's situation was quite eye-catching. Being chased by the guards was a crime that most people didn't have the guts to do. Everyone craned their necks to see, and at the same time, tried to figure out who Gu Fei was calling out to. Gu Fei was happy that the guy stopped, but he was afraid that this scene wouldn't attract him, so he pointed at him and said, "Wait, brother, the quest." The guy pointed at his nose. "That's it." Gu Fei nodded his head vigorously. "It's not a chase, but a quest?" Everyone was surprised. "What kind of quest is this? I've never seen it before." Many people muttered. Some people even got close to the guy and winked. "Brother, what kind of quest is this?" "I don't know either." The guy was naturally very confused. As they spoke, Gu Fei had already rushed in front of them. The guy's eyes were filled with innocence as he asked Gu Fei, "What kind of quest?" Because of this innocence, Gu Fei almost couldn't bear to kill him. However, he bravely stepped over this psychological barrier and announced the answer to the guy, "A wanted quest." Compared to the past, when Gu Fei announced this sentence loudly and confidently, this time, Gu Fei was a bit cowardly. The people who heard it all paled. This guy obviously knew that he had PK points, and when he heard Gu Fei's answer, he almost fainted. So the guy was shouting for him to stop and then rushing over to kill him. Who would do a wanted quest like this? The guy was confused. And Gu Fei's sword had already moved. Right now, he had no mana, and after using 2 double flame flashes and 2 thunder palms, Gu Fei couldn't even cast a lightning or fireball, and could only rely on normal attacks. The opponent in front of him just so happened to be a warrior with high HP, and not a defenseless class like a priest. As Gu Fei swung his sword, he glanced behind him. The guard's sword had already been raised, and Gu Fei had no way of instantly killing the warrior in front of him. If that was the case, he would have to fight 2 people at once. He had to put in 120% of his concentration to deal with them. Gu Fei reminded himself as he continued to swing the sword in his hand. Then he froze, then turned back again. 2 guards? For a moment, Gu Fei was in a daze. He was sure that the system guards were definitely behind him, and if they caught up to him, they would have already attacked. But in front of him, this was indeed the player from before, but this warrior was actually also a system guard with a shield in his left hand and a sword in his right. Did he really have this ability, or was he just pretending? Gu Fei had no time to think, because the warrior had already moved. Charge. When warriors piked, they would always use charge as a starter. However, the warrior held the shield in his left hand in front of him as he charged. It wasn't that Gu Fei had never seen a heavy warrior use a shield to charge, but the problem was that heavy warriors wouldn't have a sword in their hands. Dual mastery was a skill for berserkers, and heavy warriors didn't have it. The warrior in front of him had a shield in front of him and a sword hidden behind the shield. His offense was hidden within his defense, and he was using defense to attack. Just from this alone, Gu Fei could tell that this person wasn't a random passerby, but a master. At first, Gu Fei didn't take this person seriously, thinking that the guards were the ones he needed to be wary of. Now that this person had started, Gu Fei knew that dodging this attack would be much more difficult than dodging the guard's sword slash. With the sword hidden behind the shield, whether it would come from the left or the right was very different, and it would determine the direction in which Gu Fei would dodge. Uncertain, Gu Fei didn't take the risk. He had already retracted his attack, and suddenly crouched and rolled on the ground. No one could describe how fast Gu Fei rolled. This roll wasn't just a random roll, it was also a result of practice, and there was a lot of knowledge in it. Only by mastering it could one roll like Gu Fei, so fast and so cool. Naturally, the warrior had never seen such a cool roll. He felt that the target in front of him had suddenly disappeared, as if he had crouched down. He hurriedly wanted to lower his shield, but Gu Fei had already rolled to his feet. Damn, what kind of scoundrel is this? This person was also a veteran, but he had never seen such a method. For a moment, he could only react instinctively, and the sword in his hand wanted to stab at Gu Fei on the ground. This sword was originally going to stab forward, and the stance was completely set. Suddenly stabbing downwards was very uncomfortable, and it wasn't smooth at all. As a result, Before he could stab his sword, he had already suffered a heavy blow to his head. In an instant he felt dizzy and wanted to vomit. He looked up and saw that the guard was holding his sword, but his eyes weren't looking at him at all. Instead, they were staring at the scoundrel at his feet. Sorry. Unbeknownst to him, that scoundrel had already rolled away from his feet. At this moment, he had jumped behind him and was patting his shoulder. He turned around and wanted to say something, but suddenly felt a chill on his neck, and also saw a flash of lightning. After taking a direct hit from the system guard's sword, it was already a miracle that the warrior didn't die. He didn't have much HP left, and now that he was hit by a magic attack, the poor warrior was going to be sent to prison without even knowing what had happened. Sigh, I seem to be a little too despicable. Borrowing the hand of the guard to take down the warrior, Gu Fei patted the wind-chasing coat of arms and quickly disappeared. Butterfly knot. Ever since I returned home, my writing has been mediocre. Could it be that this thing also has a saying of choosing a seat? I've been choosing for more than a week. Chapter 360. PK Value, 29. He was teleported out of the line of sight of the system guards. There were no other system guards around, which meant he was safe. After Gu Fei walked out of the wanted quest office, he carefully inquired about the revival point and went offline. At the same time, a few members of the child elite group were sitting in a tavern in Waterside City. Qianli is still here? He should be here by now, right? I'll call him. Brother Yu was still saying this when Gu Fei's name suddenly turned black and went offline. TSK 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 TSK. Although Gu Fei wasn't here, he would definitely be looked down upon for going offline so early. Why isn't your friend here yet? Zhan Wushang asked as he craned his neck to look at the door of the tavern. He seemed to be someone he was looking forward to meeting. Let me ask again. Brother, you sent the message. Immediately after, his expression became extremely shocked. What? The other four asked. He's not in the service area. Brother, you said in a daze. Thus, the other four also followed in a daze. For an expert like him, there might only be one person who can send him to prison. Brother, you said carefully. You can't say that. As the saying goes, 2 fists can't fight against 4 hands. A good man can't fight against numbers. Don't you think Qianli is strong enough? But no matter how strong he is, if we all go up together, yes, we still have a chance. Unscathed in Battle said. Tisk. Unscathed in Battle's words were seriously looked down upon by everyone. As a top-tier expert, no one wanted to sit at the same table as him when he said such unconfident words. Since he's in prison, we can also go visit him in prison. Sword Demon suggested. Let's go take a look. Brother, you stood up. Who's paying the visitation fee? Who's paying the visitation fee? Unscathed in Battle and Yu Tian Shenming both shouted. He's paying. Han family young master pointed at the door and then waved his hand. Leader Unsworn. Yo, you guys are here too. It was Unsworn Sword and his brother Feng Xing who had just entered the tavern. Since solving the problem in Shady Forest City, Unsworn Sword became more and more fond of the child elite group people. The journey on the boat was so boring that he came over many times to get close to them and expressed his concern for Comrade Gu Fei several times. Leader Unsworn, what are you doing? Han family young master asked enthusiastically. Unsworn Sword hurriedly came over. Haven't we just arrived at this city? Let's take a look around and understand the situation. The tavern is indeed a good place to gather information. The young master of the Han family nodded. Of course. Unsworn Sword said happily. How long have you guys been here? We just sat here for a while. Now we're going to visit a friend. Han family young master said. A friend? Unsworn Sword mumbled as if he was talking to himself. He was quite surprised. The people in front of him were all top-notch experts in the online gaming world. They were all very arrogant. For them to take the initiative to visit, this friend was probably not a small character. Leader Unsworn, do what you need to do. We'll head over first. Han family young master gestured for the others to stand up. So they stood up one after another. Someone even deliberately said enthusiastically to Unsworn Sword, just nice, Leader Unsworn. You can sit here. After saying that, they slowly walked towards the door. Their hearts were already filled with anticipation. Everyone had already seen through Han family young master's thoughts. Hey, you guys. Just as they were about to leave, Unsworn Sword finally caught up. The five turned around and looked at him with a face full of ignorance. What's the matter? Han family young master's expression was the most ignorant one. I don't have anything to do. Why don't I go with you and sit with your friend? Let's all have some fun? Unsworn Sword suggested. We can sit, but I'm afraid we won't be able to have any fun. Han family young master said. Why? Unsworn Sword didn't understand. Because this friend is currently in prison. Han family young master said. Unsworn Sword was stunned. So he was in prison. They really had no choice but to pay him a visit. If that was the case, then this person might not be a big deal. Just as Unsworn Sword was speculating, the Han family's young master suddenly said, However, I think you should pay this friend a visit, Guild Master Unsworn. Oh, who is it? Unsworn Sword asked. Come, let's talk as we walk. Han family young master gestured. President Unsworn, don't you think the journey from Shady Forest City to Linshui City is a bit strange? Lulu asked. Han family young master suddenly changed the topic. Unsworn Sword didn't understand and could only go along with it. Why? Look, Han family young master analyzed for him. From Cloud City to Moonlit Forest City, there was a cliff and bandits blocking the way. From Moonlit Forest City to Whitestone City, there was a werewolf blocking the way. Then from Whitestone City to Shady Forest City, there was a two-way mission with Deepwater and the others. From these 3 times, each city counts as a checkpoint. The first 3 times happened on the road between the 2 cities. But this time, after leaving Shady Forest City and taking a boat to Linshui City, nothing happened. That's right, it's like this. Unsworn Sword seemed to have understood something. If we leave Linshui City now and nothing happens, doesn't this mean that the system didn't set any difficulty for the journey from Shady Forest City to Linshui City? Do you think the system would let you off so easily? Han family young master said. Of course not. Unsworn Sword blurted out. The shamelessness of the parallel world system was deeply rooted in people's hearts. No one believed that they could take advantage of the system. So, tomorrow when we take Todd and leave Linshui City, something will definitely happen? Unsworn Sword said. Han family young master nodded very seriously. That's right, it must be like this. Unsworn Sword frowned and bit his finger. So, I suggest you come with us to visit this friend. Han family young master said. What do you mean? The topic had never touched on this friend before. Now that it suddenly went around, Unsworn Sword didn't understand. In Linshui City, I think he can be of great help. Han family young master said. Oh. Unsworn Sword somewhat understood. It turned out that this person was the local tyrant of Linshui City. Just like Unsworn Sword in Cloud City, if someone came to Cloud City and needed help, he could also be of great help. Understood. Then let's go. Unsworn Sword urged. The 7 quickened their pace and quickly arrived at Linshui City's dungeon. How many? After submitting the visitation request, the dungeon guard asked in a methodical manner. 7. Brother Yu turned his head to take a look. It seemed like he was counting the number of people. After replying, he reached for his money pouch. Hey. How can you do this? Let me do it. Unsworn Sword rushed over. Han family young master promptly turned his face to the side and revealed a complacent smile. Now that things had reached this point, the child elite group felt somewhat apologetic. In fact, Unsworn Sword was not a miser. He was also a righteous person. Only, because he was the leader of a major guild, he was often quite proud of himself. His arrogant behavior was somewhat displeasing to the eyes of others. However, at this moment, Unsworn Sword didn't act pretentious at all. Instead, he very humbly rushed to pay the bill. As a result, the others couldn't control themselves for a moment. In the face of such a generous scene, everyone was bound to rush to pay. As a result, everyone waved their money pouches and engaged in an intense competition. After a long time, there was no clear winner. Sword Demon shrunk to the side and calmly said, "Stop fighting. Let's split the bill." "How can that be? Let me do it." Unsworn Sword took advantage of the moment everyone was stunned and handed the money to the guard without any explanation. The guard naturally didn't care who the money belonged to. He calculated the amount and found that there were 7 people. Then, as long as these 7 players formed a party, they could smoothly enter. As soon as they entered the dungeon, the 7 people immediately felt that this trip was not in vain. Waterside City looked ordinary on the outside, but it turned out that there was such a hidden meaning. Waterside City's dungeon was actually a water dungeon, and the passage that the 7 people were currently in was above the dungeon. The water dungeon was surrounded by walls, and the iron railings were on the ceiling. At this moment, the players in the dungeon and the dungeon could be said to be under the 7 people's feet. The 7 people looked down and discovered another strange phenomenon. The water level in the dungeon was adjusted according to the player's height. No matter which dungeon they were in, the water was basically chest deep. This was one of the outstanding aspects of the system. If it was a dungeon in real life, it would probably be very difficult to be so considerate and considerate. The 7 people walked past a few dungeons and saw very few players. It could be seen that the water dungeon's deterrent effect was very strong, resulting in a relatively low crime rate in Waterside City. Don't think that the water dungeon was as comfortable as taking a bath. Not to mention how uncomfortable it was to soak in the water for several hours. More importantly, you couldn't sit in the water dungeon, let alone lie down. This was the truly frightening aspect of the water dungeon. Because there weren't many people in the dungeon, it didn't take long for the 7 people to find Brother Yu's friend. There was no need to talk about elegance while soaking in the water. This person's face was also gloomy. Seeing that someone had come to visit, his gloomy expression didn't lessen in the slightest. "I'm here," he said listlessly. How did it turn out like this?" Brother Yu asked. "Fuck, I met a scoundrel." The other person said. "What?" Brother Yu said. "This guy ran all the way here and there was a guard behind him. He called me for a mission. I didn't understand, so I asked what mission it was. In the end, this guy ran in front of me and said it was a wanted mission. Then, he joined forces with the guard to kill me." The friend in the water said. When the child elite group heard this, their hearts palpitated. Calling for a wanted mission, this was too much like Gu Fei's style. What did that person look like? Brother Yu's heart was in his throat. He seemed to be a mage, but I didn't see him use magic. At that time, the guard cut me down with a sword, and then he attacked me from behind. Right, he used a sword and wore a black mage robe. His attack contained lightning damage. That person described. A video mage? Brother Yu asked. That person immediately revealed an expression of understanding. Right. He seems to be very similar to a video mage. Thus, everyone revealed a bitter smile. Chapter 361. Are these the friends you mentioned? Clearly, this guy in the water dungeon was not in a good mood to talk about how he ended up in the dungeon, so he began to change the topic. Yes, let me introduce you. Brother Yu introduced his teammates one by one. Each and every one of them was so famous that any player would have to express their amazement. This guy in front of him was no exception. On the other hand, Unsworn Sword had also learned a lot from this introduction. Only now did he know that this Han family young master was the Sword Demon's shadow military advisor, Drunkard. He could not help but be surprised. This was also a famous expert. After Brother Yu introduced the 4 people, he introduced Unsworn Sword and Feng Xing. In comparison, Unsworn Sword and Feng Xing were equivalent to a rich landlord in a village, while Sword Demon and Yutian Shenming were equivalent to Nangong Baiming, Shimen Dongfang, and other aristocratic families in the martial world. They would be respected no matter where they went. They were not on the same level at all. Then, Brother Yu introduced this guy in the water dungeon to them. His lines were very simple. This is a friend of mine. You might have heard of his name before, Jiananyu. The next reaction completely reflected the difference between aristocratic families and rich landlords. When the 4 experts heard this idea of the 5 roaches, They all let out a long "oh," expressing the meaning of, "so it's you." As for Unsworn Sword, he looked so excited that he wanted to jump into the water dungeon to share the joys and sorrows with others. People like him who were involved in business loved to make friends with various experts in the game. That was why he wanted to tag along when he heard that the child elite group was going to visit a certain someone. At this moment, when he heard that the other party was actually a top-notch expert of the 5 roaches, Unsworn Sword's desire to make friends with him grew even stronger. Although he knew that the other party had definitely made a name for himself in Linshui City, and it was impossible for him to invite him to Cloud City, he could at least get to know him and become friends. Who knows, maybe in the future, they would have the opportunity to establish a 28 club alliance or something. Even if they didn't have any more opportunities to cooperate, he could still brag about it on the dinner table. He could say that he was very familiar with one of the 5 elites. Thinking up to this point, Unsworn Sword had already squatted down, stretching out his arm to shake the other party's hand. Jian Nanyu was a gentleman. Although he was uncomfortable in the water, he did not refuse. Instead, he reminded her in a gentlemanly manner, "Sorry, my hands are wet." "Let's do it." Unsworn Sword clenched his fists so tightly that he almost pulled Jian Nanyu up. "For today's trip, I'll have to ask for your help, brother." Unsworn Sword was truly generous. He had only just gotten to know each other, but he was already preparing to hand over the quest. This was also where Unsworn Sword understood the ways of the world. Now that he mentioned this in front of Brother Yu, it was unlikely that the other party would reject him. Moreover, Brother Yu and the others would inevitably speak up for him. If he waited until the party was over and he came looking for him alone, it was hard to say if the other party would help him. Jian Nanyu was initially quite puzzled as to why this person was so enthusiastic. Now that he saw that the other party was asking for his help, he understood. Thus, he did not ask further and immediately nodded. Sure. Did someone steal your equipment? If you want to steal equipment, you'll have to hurry." "What did you say?" Unsworn Sword suspected that he had misheard. He felt that what Jian Nanyu had just said was completely different from what he had said. "You didn't get your equipment stolen? Then there's no need to hurry. How much money was stolen? If I have enough on me, I can give it to you now," said Jian Nanyu. Unsworn Sword was even more confused. He raised his head and looked at Brother Yu blankly. His hand that had been holding Jian Nanyu loosened a little. Brother Yu finally spoke up for Unsworn Sword. He frowned and asked Jian Nanyu, "What are you talking about?" Jian Nanyu was also stunned. He looked at Unsworn Sword again and said carefully, "Didn't you get robbed when you came on the boat?" "Robbed?" said Unsworn Sword. "Forget about the conversation just now." Jian Nanyu coughed. However, the others had already understood. For example, Sword Demon frowned and asked, "What do you do?" "I'm a professional player." Jian Nanyu raised his head and looked at Sword Demon. Sword Demon was a famous person. It was not difficult for players who paid attention to him to know his character. Jian Nanyu knew that this boss-level character, who had limitless glory in countless games, was a rare upright person compared to ordinary players. Although he was not as deep as someone who hated evil as his enemy, he at least disdained people with bad character. For players like him, he could already hear some clues from Jian Nanyu's self-confident slip of the tongue. As a professional player, Jian Nanyu's profession was probably very improper. Speaking of which, this kind of behavior of killing people's equipment was not strange in the oldest online games. Today, the game had even developed to the point of professionalization, industrialization, and collectivization. This also proved the vigorous development and vitality of online games from a dark side. For most players, they would not pay too much attention to such characters as long as they did not drop their equipment. Some people would even strive to become friends with them to prevent them from dropping their equipment. Online games were never a place to breed righteous heroes. Even a rare upright person like Sword Demon, if he had not become a victim of such behavior in the parallel world, might not have been so indignant when he met such a character. Jian Nanyu and Sword Demon's gazes were already sparking. However, Brother Yu quickly came out to smooth things over. He put one hand on Sword Demon's shoulder and squeezed it. He laughed and said, "We are passing by on a quest. This brother is the guild leader of this quest. You're familiar with this place. He means that you might be able to provide some help in this aspect." In the introduction just now, Brother Yu only mentioned each person's name. He did not mention Sword Without Oath status. Oh, so that's how it is. Jian Nanyu shifted his gaze away from the battle and looked at Sword Without Oath again. That's easy. We'll contact each other after we get out. Just let me know if you need any help. Thank you, thank you. Unsworn Sword was a classic example of a person who, regardless of whether the other party was good or bad, could become friends as long as the other party did not get on his bad side. Now that Unsworn Sword was even willing to help him, it would not be impossible for them to become brothers. By the way, didn't you say that you wanted to introduce a powerful person to me? These people shouldn't be him, right? Brother Yu only mentioned the names of the 6 people he introduced. Han family young master briefly mentioned Drunkard to let him know who he was. With such an equal and concise introduction, it was obvious that they were not the special guest. Cough. Brother Yu let out a hollow laugh. You might have met him before. Jian Nanyu was confused. He's the video magician, Brother Yu confessed. The guy that put me in jail? Jian Nanyu was very excited. The sound of water splashing was the proof. I'm afraid so. Brother Yu glanced at his companions as he spoke. They clearly agreed with his judgment. We're friends, forget it. Brother Yu had already started to help Gu Fei. Jian Nanyu actually responded in such a simple manner. The speed at which he calmed down was shocking. Well, we'll be leaving first. We'll talk when you're out. How many hours are you in jail? Brother Yu asked. 4, Jian Nanyu replied. All right, we'll be leaving first. Brother Yu prepared to lead everyone out. Sword Demon left without hesitation. Brother Yu was also worried that something unpleasant might happen if he continued to stay, so he hurriedly expressed his intention to leave. Only Unsworn Sword was reluctant to leave, but his friend was about to leave. As someone he had just met, he didn't have the face to continue staying. Guild leader Unsworn, about your guild mission, you can talk to him yourself when he's out, okay? Brother Yu said to Unsworn Sword after leaving the dungeon. Alright, no problem. Thanks. Unsworn Sword nodded happily. Also, he's a standard professional gamer. If he thinks it's too troublesome, he might charge a fee. I can't really persuade him otherwise. After all, he relies on this to make a living. Don't mind him. Brother Yu said, I understand, no problem. Unsworn Sword didn't mind at all. Then that's it for now. Brother Yu said goodbye to Unsworn Sword on behalf of the 5 young masters. Sword Demon's expression was still uncertain. After the 5 of them walked for a distance, he finally asked Brother Yu, what does this friend of yours do? Brother Yu seemed to have been waiting for this question. I only know that he's always been a professional gamer, but I didn't know that this time, he's playing this profession. There were many types of professional gamers. There were the hardest gold farming groups, the more capable selling their bodies, and the more business-minded reselling groups. Some specialized in one of these, while others were all-rounders. These were the more open and above-board ways of playing the profession. Other than that, there were also professional gamers with a dark side. For example, those who stole people's equipment was one of them. Other than that, there was also the scamming industry that could infiltrate the various categories. In the early days, there were even people who stole accounts for a living. However, with the improvement of safety awareness and security technology, this business was extinct. However, in the parallel world that used holographic simulation, some new nasty businesses were created. According to rumors, a very primitive service industry had appeared in some of the main cities. This was a clearly unhealthy trend, but it was strongly supported by many people, especially men. It was said that this industry was enough to set off a tourism frenzy in the game. At this time, Sword Demon was very disdainful of Jian Nan's profession, but this person was Brother Yu's friend. How to properly handle various interpersonal relationships without losing their principles was a big problem. For a moment, no one knew how to do it. The five of them kept moving forward in silence until they passed by a tavern where the Han family young master disappeared. After the other four discovered it, they said goodbye and went their separate ways. Chapter 362. The next day, Gu Fei logged on rather early. He wanted to thoroughly clean up his PK points. At 7 p.m., everyone had to be on their way again. If a PK battle were to occur on the road, it would be too much of a burden. It was better to have a lower PK points. He quickly rushed to the wanted quest office. Before he reached the entrance, Gu Fei had already slowed down his footsteps. His keen intuition told him that someone was paying attention to him. Linshui City's wanted quest office was very close to the local market. Because there wasn't enough space, the stalls in the market had already extended to this location. This caused the place to be bustling with people. Gu Fei couldn't clearly tell who it was, but he was sure that the other party was doing it on purpose. A casual glance from the two of them and a focused stare were two completely different situations. The latter was what Gu Fei described as killing intent. As for the former, it was too weak, and it only lasted for a moment, so it was basically impossible to catch. At this moment, Gu Fei had already sensed that someone was watching him. Moreover, this feeling continued. It was clear that the other party didn't know that Gu Fei had already discovered him. Gu Fei had experienced this kind of brazen surveillance too many times in the game. A thief in stealth was this unscrupulous. Unfortunately, in a crowded place, Gu Fei couldn't clearly catch them. But because of this, he stopped and pretended to admire the goods on the roadside stalls. In his heart, he was constantly calculating. They didn't come with good intentions. That was for sure. If they were looking for him for something normal, they wouldn't need to use stealth surveillance. After seeing him, they would immediately rush over to greet him. As for who they were, it wasn't too hard to guess. This city's robbing business had already expanded to the water. How could the land be peaceful? Gu Fei reckoned that this group of people were the same as yesterday. They hadn't given up on their evil intentions and had come looking for him again. Being watched at the entrance of the wanted quest office shouldn't be a coincidence. It was very likely that the other party had arranged people here to wait for him to appear. They expected that with Gu Fei's gorgeous PK points, they would definitely come to clean up. However, when he logged off yesterday, there was no such arrangement. Could it be that these guys waited patiently for him to come back online for an entire day and night? How persevering! However, now that he had been squatting for so long, why was the person staring at him still the same? Could it be that this person was the only one who could deal with him? He was looking down on himself too much. Or could it be that the one on the street was just a lookout, and the real ambush was at the place where he had to go, the wanted mission office? While Gu Fei was thinking, he turned around and glanced at the door of the wanted mission office. What a familiar door! Closed as usual. Gu Fei stared silently for a long time, but did not see anyone enter or leave. Gu Fei was familiar with this door. It was abnormal for so few players to enter and exit. This made him even more certain that there was something fishy going on. But as the saying goes, the skilled are bold. After confirming that the ambush was in this room, Gu Fei was mentally prepared and immediately walked towards the room. He wanted to see what other tricks these guys had up their sleeves. Arriving in front of the door, Gu Fei stretched out his hand and grabbed the door handle. This door had two doors on the left and right. Gu Fei stretched out his arm and only pushed open the left half of the door. His hand continued to hold onto the door handle, and he only took half a step in. His right hand held the sword horizontally across his body and formed a small sword sign. Whether it was slashing, stabbing, or casting spells in any direction, he could cast them at the fastest speed. It could be considered as a sword move that Gu Fei had created and was very suitable for the game. As soon as he took half a step in, Gu Fei could already feel the murderous aura, especially on the right side. There was no one there, but the murderous aura was the strongest. Of course, Gu Fei knew that it was a thief in stealth who was currently rushing towards him. But Gu Fei was already prepared for this. After his left foot planted firmly on the ground, his right foot that was still outside the room immediately pushed forward, and the door on the right was immediately pushed in. This door was very flexible, and the opening required at least 500 agility. The thief that was rushing over did not expect this, and with a bang he was hit by the door and could only cry out in pain. There was an ambush on the right side, so how could there not be one on the left side? Gu Fei's right foot hooked onto the door, and his left hand was not idle either. He stretched out his left arm, and the door went straight towards the wall. The guy on the other side probably saw that the door was open and was about to circle around and attack. He did not expect that Gu Fei would open the door so excessively, directly opening it 180 degrees. After crying out in pain, he was also stuck to the wall along with the door. Of course, this was only temporary. If it was a Herculean warrior, perhaps they would be able to press the person to death behind the door. But Gu Fei knew his own limits, so he did not try this at all. After pushing the person against the door, he quickly pulled the door back, protecting it on his left side. With the night streamer on his right, he smiled and said, "Why is it so crowded here?" There were indeed quite a few people in the room, and they were all pretending to be queuing up to receive a quest. What they did not know was that Gu Fei had been waiting outside for a long time and did not see anyone come out. The system's quests weren't issued at the ticket window of the train station, and after so long, there was still a bunch of people queuing up. This was very telling. After Gu Fei finished speaking, the room became silent, and then with a squeak, the door on the right side closed on its own. A thief behind the door covered his nose and fiercely glared at Gu Fei. "Are you okay?" Gu Fei asked, "I don't know if this door has any attack power. Did your health drop?" The thief roared, and with both hands holding onto his dagger he rushed towards Gu Fei. Then with another pung, the door on the right flashed in and out. Gu Fei shook his head. You're not improving at all. You can hit the same door twice. Do you know how much damage you'll take this time?" At this time, the thief on the left came out from behind the door and stabbed with his dagger. Unexpectedly, Gu Fei's body shrank back, causing the left half of the door to turn back 45 degrees. The thief stabbed the door with his knife. Gu Fei then pushed again, and with another ping, the thief on the left also covered his nose and retreated. "Look, this door is movable." Gu Fei pushed it twice, as if he was blowing the bellows. The two thieves almost cried. "What are you waiting for? Do it." The group of people finally stopped pretending to queue up, and after saying these words, a group of tigers and wolves immediately attacked. Spells, arrows, charges, and even the priest's holy light orbs, all of them bombarded Gu Fei. In the end, Gu Fei took half a step back and gently closed the door. A violent vibration came from Gu Fei's hand that was holding the doorknob. One could imagine how much impact the door had received, but it was not damaged in the slightest, and Gu Fei, who was behind the door, did not receive the slightest bit of damage. The defense of this kind of cover made all the exquisite equipment in the game pale in comparison. Gu Fei let go of the door, jumped down the stairs, and with a wave of his hand, a wall of electricity had already formed close to the wall. At the same time, the door was pulled open by the group of angry ambushers. Gu Fei looked to the left and right, and saw the two thieves from before. The two of them were ready to jump out of the door, but with a prng sound, they were embedded in the wall of electricity. The electricity flickered, and they couldn't help but tremble. The one on the left couldn't even hold the dagger in his hand, and it fell to the ground. Gu Fei shook his head. Today, these two people were really unlucky. They really couldn't avoid it. As he thought about it, Gu Fei had already turned around and ran away. From the start, he didn't plan on fighting with the other party in the room. The space in the room was limited, and a few mage's spells could cover the entire area. In that kind of situation, no matter how good one's skills were, there was nowhere to hide. Gu Fei pushed the door open, thinking that if there was a suitable opportunity, he would accept a quest and run away. Although the two thieves on the left and right side of the door had been miserably played by Gu Fei, the other party's arrangements were very thorough. This could be seen from the positions of their people. Thus, Gu Fei didn't engage in too much entanglement. After a slight provocation, he swaggered off. When the time effect of the wall of electricity disappeared, Gu Fei had already turned a corner and disappeared. Since he couldn't do any wanted quests, Gu Fei immediately discovered that he didn't know what to do. Kill monsters to level up? It seemed like that was the only way. As Gu Fei thought about it, he pulled over a player beside him and asked about the location of Linshui City's level 50 leveling area. Level 50? That player looked at Gu Fei in astonishment, and at the same time, secretly used Identify on Gu Fei. At present, those who could fight monsters 10 levels higher than them were all very strong parties. Solo players could at most fight monsters 3 to 5 levels higher than them. This guy in front of him was alone, yet he opened his mouth and asked about level 50. What kind of concept was this? This person was very curious, but he didn't say anything. He only looked at the time and said, "The ship to the level 50 leveling area has probably already left. It will only arrive in an hour." You also need to take a ship to the leveling area? Gu Fei's mouth was wide open. Gu Fei's first question was such a basic question. This player had already guessed that he was from outside the city. At this moment, when these words came out of his mouth, he no longer had any doubts. He patiently said, "Can't you see that our Linshui city is surrounded by water? The leveling areas are all small islands on the surface of the water. At fixed times, there are ships at the pier that go to the leveling areas. So, if you want to level in Linshui city, you have to grasp the time." "So troublesome," Gu Fei muttered. "Don't the players think of their own ways? In the beginning, I heard that there were people who made their own ships, but they were often stolen or damaged by others. There's no helping it, those things can't be put in a pocket. In fact, every leveling area has a ship every hour. As long as you pay attention to the time, it's not troublesome. You'll get used to it." So, gradually people stopped making ships. Oh! Gu Fei finally understood the customs of Linshui city. After saying goodbye to this person, Gu Fei headed towards the pier. Since he couldn't go to the level 50 leveling area, he would see if there were any other leveling areas. Since there were ships, he didn't need to look for them himself. As Gu Fei thought about it, he suddenly felt that Yu Tianxinming's life in this place was actually very good. Once he went out, he didn't need to find his own way. There would be ships that would send him to the accurate and suitable leveling area. Once he was done, there would be ships to pick him up again. For a person with no sense of direction, this was really too convenient. Butterfly knot. I've been writing for the past 2 days and have gradually found the mood. But next month, I have to go back to Beijing again. Don't tell me I have to choose another place. Chapter 363. Gu Fei didn't know where the pier was. When they came over, they drove their own boat directly onto the beach. After that, they fled in panic to avoid being surrounded by onlookers. From what he remembered, there didn't seem to be a pier nearby. Thus, Gu Fei asked around as he walked. Twice, he was targeted by the guards because he wasn't familiar with the city. However, because his PK value was less than 30, he only attracted a few fixed guards. As long as he escaped a certain distance, they wouldn't bother him anymore. For Gu Fei, who had teleportation, this wasn't difficult. Along the way, Gu Fei finally arrived at the official pier of Waterside City. The pier was very big and had several berths. Some had ships docked and players were boarding the ships. Some had no ships and no people. Some had no ships, but there were many players waiting, presumably because the ships were about to arrive. There were even some ships that had just left the shore. There were a few players who didn't make it to the ship and were jumping and cursing at the berths. However, this was what a pier should be like. Gu Fei didn't care. What really surprised him was that this wasn't just a pier, but a large-scale market. The sky was blue, the water was blue, and the breeze was often mixed with water droplets. The golden beach beside the pier was clearly divided into many areas. The left side was obviously the trading area. Many players set up stalls here and made full use of the richest resource here, sand. Everyone piled the sand into all kinds of strange shapes and then placed the equipment they wanted to sell on them to attract the attention of others. The most amazing thing was that there was a person who piled the sand into a model as tall as a person, wearing clothes and carrying a sword. Not to mention the stats of the equipment, at least the appearance was obvious and attracted the attention of countless people. This person's business was also very prosperous. The Sandman model's clothes were sold and worn again, and when he was free, he would make new models. Such a wonderful idea was only envied by the surrounding players who were selling goods. No one tried to imitate him. Obviously, the person who piled the models must have used some special method or technique that others wanted to learn, but didn't know the trick. The left side was mainly for trading, while the right side was for leisure. There were actually round tables and wooden stools on the beach. Of course, the chairs weren't for free. These were all player-owned open-air taverns. There were also players guarding the liquor cabinets nearby, selling alcohol to the visiting players. This method was obviously more profitable than Little Ray's bar. Little Ray had invested quite a lot in the system's big house alone. After that, he had to go through the formal route to apply to the system to open a shop. In this way, the system would record it and deduct a certain amount of money from the turnover every day. This was called tax by the players. Moreover, the system was truly despicable. It was not ashamed of the players' mockery. Instead, it was proud of it. Seeing that more and more players were starting to open up shop, the system actually started a daily activity of judging the merchant that paid the most taxes as the star of tax payment. The rewards were so great that the players who opened shops had to wake up early and work late. They competed with each other and suppressed each other, creating a foul atmosphere. Of course, a regular merchant like Little Ray also had the advantages of a regular merchant. For example, if you took the alcohol but didn't pay, he could summon the system guards with a text message. After all, his shop was registered in the system. During transactions, if someone took the alcohol but didn't pay, the system would be able to check. It wasn't that he only believed Little Ray's side of the story. However, he gave the right to call for help to the boss. After all, sometimes the boss would treat his friends to a free drink or two. If the system guards came to take the people away, it would be too much of a letdown. Compared to Little Ray, the players in front of him couldn't possibly pay taxes to the system. Naturally, they wouldn't receive the system's protection. What if a strong person came to eat for free? Even if the boss was a peerless master, he couldn't afford to offend a guild that came to visit. As Gu Fei admired the scenery, he began to worry about the bosses. However, when he walked closer and looked at the signboards on the liquor cabinets, he finally understood. These open-air, non-system-operated taverns didn't have any individual business. They were all owned by guilds. The most eye-catching position on the liquor cabinets clearly indicated that they belonged to a certain guild. This was enough of a deterrent. If you wanted to be hunted down by the entire guild, then come eat and dash. There were many people in this open-air tavern. Compared to the indoor tavern that Gu Fei and the others usually stayed in, this place naturally had a different flavor. Gu Fei felt that it was interesting as he walked around. For a moment, he forgot that he was going to farm monsters and level up. He began to look around for an empty spot, wanting to experience it. This action was immediately noticed by an experienced player who was selling alcohol. He took out the enthusiasm of a boss and rushed over. "Brother, do you want to find a place to sit?" "Yes." Gu Fei nodded. "Here, there's still space here." "How many people?" The other person asked. "One." Gu Fei said. "Big Ben, one person. Give me a small table." The player turned around and shouted, "Coming!" A warrior who was squatting beside the liquor cabinet stood up and walked over. With a whoosh, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small round table that looked like a bedside table. He then took a stool from the side and placed it in place. "Sit." "How much weight do you carry?" Gu Fei sat down, dumbfounded. The warrior smiled honestly and returned to his original spot to squat and play with the sand again. "Brother, what would you like to order?" The serving player reached out and actually handed over a wine list. Gu Fei looked up. The wine was still the same, but the price was even more expensive than a regular store like Little Ray's bar, which had to pay taxes. It seemed that this place didn't just sell alcohol, but also this special atmosphere. Gu Fei sighed inwardly. At the same time, he secretly glanced around, trying to see what other players wanted. At a glance, he found that although the environment had changed, the players' consumption concept was still the same. Most of the drinks were still cheap. Just as Gu Fei was about to order a serving, he suddenly found that there was a single table that was the same as his, with 2 bottles of the most expensive 200 yuan. Someone who would drink this kind of wine. Gu Fei looked up and sure enough, Han family young master was sitting there with a glass of wine in his hand. The difference was that everyone who drank here would look around and feel the atmosphere while drinking. Only this guy's attention was completely focused on the glass in his hand. "Excuse me." Gu Fei suddenly stood up. "I have a friend over there. I'll go sit with him." "Where?" The serving player looked displeased. After all, he had specially opened a special table for Gu Fei. After Gu Fei pointed, the player's face revealed an ecstatic expression. Because the person sitting at that table was Han family young master. Han family young master's wine was expensive, fast, and in large quantities. This kind of customer was the favorite of the hotel owner. Now that Gu Fei was this person's friend, wouldn't he drink faster and more if he went over to help him consume more of his wine? It should be known that a single glass of this kind of wine was worth many glasses of the cheapest wine. Moreover, this guy actually wanted it by the bottle. The player's attitude suddenly became enthusiastic again. He rushed over to help Gu Fei place the chair in front of Han family young master's table. Han family young master finally stopped paying attention to his glass of wine. He turned his head and saw Gu Fei behind the player. Without saying a word, he turned his head back and continued to pay attention to his glass of wine. The serving player was puzzled. Han family young master's attitude was like he was looking at a mass of air. Gu Fei didn't mind. He patted that person and said, "Get me a glass of wine." After saying that, he sat down. That person immediately reached into his pocket and took out the biggest wine glass he had for Gu Fei. It was so big that even Han family young master's calm face showed a trace of surprise. The player's eyes flashed with a hint of slyness. He patted Gu Fei's shoulder intimately and said, "Enjoy your drink." Gu Fei nodded and ignored Han family young master's expression. He took the wine bottle and poured a full glass of wine. The glass was indeed big. After one glass, half of the bottle was gone. Gu Fei held the glass and felt very satisfied. Before he could take a sip, someone flashed to Gu Fei's side and lowered his head to ask, "Brother, do you want some roasted fish?" "Roasted fish?" Gu Fei was surprised. That person turned around and pointed. Gu Fei looked over and saw that in an awkward part of the beach, there were piles of bonfires on the ground. Smoke curled up from the chimneys. Many players were squatting in front of the bonfires with sticks in their hands. Most of the sticks were pierced with fish. As they roasted the fish, they looked at the wine stall to see if there were any new customers. A few of them looked regretful that Gu Fei had been robbed first. Chef Proficiency 2700. I guarantee you will be satisfied. The player continued to recommend himself. How much? One fish or a skewer? Gu Fei asked. One fish is a skewer. The player replied, but we all call it a stick. All the fish are the same size? Gu Fei suddenly became curious and gossipy. They are all farmed by the system. I guarantee that they are the same size. The player replied confidently. How much? 5 gold coins. That's quite expensive. Gu Fei was speechless. As a matter of fact, Cloud City hadn't developed its food industry yet. The other main cities were just passing by. Even if there were, they wouldn't know about it. Therefore, Gu Fei didn't understand the market. That's the price. The player said. Then let's try 2 sticks first. Gu Fei said. But that person quickly nodded and ran away as fast as he could. Not long after, he returned with 2 sticks in his hands. There were 2 fish pierced on the sticks. To be honest, it was very crude. However, there was a sense of wildness in it. Gu Fei looked at the fish and felt that it was very tempting. After paying the gold coins, Gu Fei took the fish and 1 stick and handed it to the Han family young master. The Han family young master was raising his wine glass and slowly shook his head. Try it. Gu Fei had already tasted it and felt that it was very good. He strongly recommended it. I have eaten 6 sticks. The Han family young master said as he tapped the ground with his feet. Gu Fei looked down and saw the sticks on the ground. He was shocked and said, You can eat and drink. Are you a good-for-nothing? The Han family young master's expression turned cold. He coldly reminded, "The wine you drank is mine." Gu Fei quickly nodded and drank a mouthful. At this moment, a shout suddenly came, "Look, it's that guy." Chapter 364. Gu Fei held a stick of fish in his left hand and a glass of wine in his right. When he heard the shout, he turned his head and looked over. At the same time, he gulped down the wine and chewed the fish. He looked much better than the Han family young master. The Han family young master also turned his head and looked at the source of the shout. He glanced at the group of people and looked back at Gu Fei. "Are they looking for you?" "Probably." Gu Fei mumbled without opening his mouth. He rubbed a fish bone between his lips and put down the wineglass with his right hand. Then, he didn't take the wineglass. Instead, he took out the night streamer. There weren't many people here. There were only 6 of them. Therefore, Gu Fei didn't care about his safety at all. He was only concerned about his PK points being 29. He didn't want to get involved. Therefore, he wanted this group of people to retreat in the face of difficulties. This was more troublesome than killing them instantly. The 6 people walked over quickly. As Gu Fei ate the fish, he was ready to fight. He didn't have any intention of being careless. Unexpectedly, when the 6 people were halfway through, the 2 players who were moving the tables walked up to them. "Do you know the rules?" "Of course we do." One of the 6 people smiled. "But we're just walking around and not fighting. I don't think we're breaking any rules, right?" Hearing this, the 2 players hesitated for a moment before moving aside. However, they still stared at the 6 people. As expected, the 6 people walked toward Gu Fei. Many players around them noticed the 6 people's overbearing aura and looked over. Gu Fei and the Han family young master heard the conversation between the 6 people and the 2 people. There seemed to be a tacit understanding between them. As 2 outsiders, they naturally didn't know what was going on. However, there was no need to make wild guesses. Gu Fei moved closer to the 2 players sitting next to each other and asked, "Brother, what kind of rules were they talking about?" The 2 players were quite surprised. At a time like this person wasn't hurrying to escape, but was still inquiring about the inside of this place. However, even though they were surprised, they still explained it to Gu Fei. The answer was similar to what Gu Fei and the Han family young master had guessed. It was because this place was opened by a guild. In layman's terms, it was protected by the guild. Even those who tried to dine and dash would not be tolerated, let alone a fight that affected the business. "So, if I sit here and don't leave, they won't make a move, right?" Gu Fei asked. "Should be it." When the 2 of them heard that Gu Fei seemed to have such a plan, they were even more surprised. Even if this place could be regarded as a PK safe zone, it wasn't a safe zone for going offline. "How long are you going to sit there?" When Gu Fei received the answer, he felt relieved. He turned around and put away the night streak sword. He picked up his wineglass and said to the Han family young master, "It's fine, it's fine. They have people up there." After saying that, he ate a mouthful of fish, drank a mouthful of wine, and continued to enjoy himself. The Han family young master only raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything and continued to drink his wine. In the blink of an eye, the 6 players arrived in front of the 2 players' table. Originally, they had planned to aggressively charge over with a clear goal in mind. Gu Fei would definitely turn tail and run. Then they would have to chase after him. Once he was out of the area protected by the guild, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. Who would have thought that Gu Fei would be completely indifferent? This caused the 6 players to be at a loss. They couldn't just stand in front of the 2 players' table and not make a move. What made them even more annoyed was that the 2 players at the table completely ignored the 6 of them. Those who were drinking drank and those who were eating fish ate fish. From time to time, they would raise their heads to look at the glaring sunlight in the sky. In any case, they couldn't see the 6 players. "Hey brother, if there's nothing else, can you move aside?" One of them couldn't hold it in and spoke to the Han family young master. His intention was to clear the area and create some pressure for Gu Fei. "I'm busy." The Han family young master didn't move from his seat. His words made the other party swallow his words. Although the 6 of them were furious, They couldn't do anything to the Han family young master. Truth be told, the Han family young master and Gu Fei were sitting at the same table. However, they couldn't tell if the two of them knew each other. The two of them didn't seem to be communicating with each other at all. They were completely minding their own business. Therefore, the six of them could only focus on Gu Fei. They stared at him and said, "Hey, let's talk somewhere else." Gu Fei had already finished his fish stick, but he still had one stick left. He raised his fish stick and looked at the six of them. What is there to talk about? The six of them were speechless. Frankly speaking, they weren't here to talk. They were here to fight. However, why was the person they met so untactful today? Moreover, they couldn't use force to solve the problem in this place. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble. The six of them weren't good with words. Their usual greetings were cut short. Since they couldn't fight, they didn't know what to say. Call for help. This guy is acting shamelessly. It's not good for us to fight. Since he likes to drag it out, let him drag it out. Let's call more people to guard this place so that he won't be able to leave even if he wants to. The six of them began to communicate privately. Let's do this. Therefore, the six of them began to call for their friends who were online. They stood beside the table where Gu Fei and the others were. This amusing standoff caused the surrounding players who were drinking to laugh. However, this also showed how safe this beach was. In reality, not every guild had their own area on the beach. In this territory, they were a small alliance. Players who caused trouble here would be ganged up on by a few guilds. After killing the chicken to warn the monkey, all the players in Linshui City saw the determination of these guilds. No one dared to cause trouble here again. After a short while, Gu Fei finished his second fish stick. He raised his head and said, "You guys haven't left yet." "Brat, don't pretend to be calm. Don't even think of leaving here today." Someone replied. "Who said I want to leave?" Gu Fei said as he waved his hand and asked for another 2 fish sticks. The fish came quickly and the aroma filled the air. Gu Fei keenly heard the sound of the 6 of them swallowing their saliva. At this moment, the Han family young master suddenly raised his head and looked at the 6 of them. "When will the people you called for arrive?" The 6 of them were in a daze. After a while, they finally believed that the Han family young master was talking to them. Naturally, they were shocked. How did he know that they had already called for reinforcements? However, they didn't know that their reactions made the Han family young master even more confident in his deduction. The 6 of them stood there stupidly. They didn't say anything and didn't leave. From time to time, their faces would reveal expressions of confidence. He guessed that they had called for reinforcements in order to prevent Gu Fei from escaping. Therefore, he gave them a simple test. The expressions of the 6 of them immediately betrayed them. "Tell your people to hurry up. Otherwise, it won't be fun anymore." Han family young master continued. The 6 of them were already dumbfounded. Was the other party deliberately mystifying things, or did he really have a big move? The 6 of them hoped to find some clues from the two's expressions. In the end, they only saw one of them focused on drinking while the other focused on eating fish. From this simple conversation, they could only come to one conclusion: the Han family young master and Gu Fei were friends. "This person isn't from our Linshui city, right?" The 6 of them began to discuss in private. "I don't think so. I've never seen such a person before." Someone replied. "I've never seen him before either." The remaining people expressed their opinions one after another. "Moreover, I've never heard of him before." Someone added. Of course, the Han family young master belonged to the category of people who had an unforgettable memory. Moreover, it was very special. This kind of person, as long as any gossipy person had seen him before, it would quickly spread throughout the entire city. Cloud City was like this. There was a male priest who looked like this. "TSK, have you seen him before?" This saying had been circulating since the beginning of Cloud City until now. However, there had never been such a rumor in Linshui City. Therefore, the 6 of them came to an accurate conclusion. The Han family young master definitely wasn't a person from Linshui City. At this time, Gu Fei's 2 new sticks of fish were finished. Gu Fei realized that it wasn't difficult to finish 6 fish. He guessed that this was the work of the game system. In order to promote the consumption of food, it made everyone a big eater in terms of stomach capacity. However, because he had mocked the Han family young master with 6 fish, he had to control himself. At this time, he had finished the wine in the half-filled glass. The Han family young master also took the opportunity to finish the wine in the wine bottle on the table. Suddenly, the two of them fell into a situation where they had nothing to do. No wonder this guy was so anxious. Why hasn't the opponent's people arrived yet? Gu Fei thought to himself as he began to look around. Is 4 fish enough? The Han family young master looked at him. Yes. Gu Fei nodded firmly. He definitely couldn't give the Han family young master a chance to mock him. The Han family young master didn't pay any more attention to him. He looked at the 6 of them and then looked at the time. The 6 of them were elated. Gu Fei and the Han family young master followed their gaze and saw 2 players dashing towards the pier. They were led by 2 bandits. They were the 2 bandits that Gu Fei had clipped with the door. Gu Fei couldn't help but laugh. Yet, he was still able to laugh at this moment. This made the 6 of them even more confused. Gu Fei turned around and looked at the 6 of them. He continued with a smile, "What are you guys so happy about? I still don't plan to leave. Since they're here, can we fight here? You want to leave?" The 6 of them sneered. It was obvious that the 6 of them were much more confident after their companions arrived. "Yeah, I want to leave. What are you guys going to do?" Gu Fei smiled and suddenly stood up. The 6 of them were startled and quickly retreated. No one dared to fight in this place. However, they knew that Gu Fei was from another city. Perhaps he didn't know the rules here well. If he made a rash move, they might be implicated. Unexpectedly, the Han family young master suddenly said, "Don't be in such a hurry. Sit down." Gu Fei was puzzled. "Open another bottle of wine." The Han family young master snapped his fingers at the wine cellar. He turned around and said to Gu Fei, "Sit down and watch the show." "What show?" Gu Fei knew that this guy must be up to something again. He also knew that those who were tortured by the Han family young master had a miserable ending. Gu Fei was happy to see these guys miserable. Therefore, he sat down again. Chapter 365. More and more people hurried over from the main road leading to the docks. After all, every character had different movement speeds. After the 2 fastest thieves arrived, they didn't go over to Gu Fei's side. They exchanged glances with the other 6 players and then stood outside of the circle. Moreover, they brazenly disappeared and went into stealth. Using stealth at this moment was quite useful because Gu Fei's group was the most eye-catching in the beach pub. Countless players were looking at them with their cups in their hands. Gu Fei could feel countless people paying attention to him. It wasn't easy to distinguish between these 2 thieves in stealth. However, even if he went into stealth, the opponents definitely wouldn't dare to attack Gu Fei. As a result, Gu Fei continued to calmly look at the street, counting how many people were coming for him. As he continued to look, he felt that these people were the same people he had seen in the wanted quest room. It seemed like the other side only had this many people. Even Han family young master felt disappointed. He shook his head and said, "You only have this many people." The other side coldly laughed. "What? You think it's not enough? Don't worry, just sit for a bit longer. Maybe you'll be satisfied." Han family young master smiled warmly, "Then let's sit for a bit longer. Just wait for your deaths." Although the other side said this, he couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. It was because the 2 of them were too calm, that they couldn't calm down from beginning to end. At this moment, a few players from the open-air wine stalls suddenly stood up and walked away. This scene gave the 6 players and Gu Fei a big fright. Gu Fei thought that the other side had secretly gathered so many people and was prepared to ignore the rules and force their way in. The 6 players suspected that the 2 of them had some sort of big move up their sleeves. Seeing so many people suddenly stand up, they were scared out of their wits. However, the 2 sides quickly looked at each other and saw some clues from each other's expressions. The other side had the same worries as them. It seemed like these people's actions didn't come from the other side's arrangements. At the same time, the players who had just stood up walked in a certain direction. When the 6 waterfront players looked closely, they immediately understood what was going on. They couldn't help but laugh. Gu Fei was still a little confused. After observing for a while, he finally understood. It turned out that there was a boat coming back from the docks, and these people were obviously going to take this boat to the leveling area. Since they had arrived a little early, they decided to sit in the open-air tavern for a while. The open-air tavern wouldn't have done so well just because of the scenery. It was because of the pier. Gu Fei felt relieved and relaxed again. However, when he looked at the 6 of them, they didn't just feel relieved. They even looked excited. This made Gu Fei feel a little strange. He then looked at the Han family young master and found that he was also very satisfied. The ship drew nearer and nearer to the pier. It was also a sailboat, but this one could be considered a giant ship. It was many times larger than the one Gu Fei had taken from the system guards. Gu Fei didn't know if a sailboat could be this big, but he didn't have any reason to argue with the system. Moreover, this ship was also for the players. Naturally, the bigger the better. If it was only able to carry 100 people, the players of Waterfront City would definitely revolt. Such a small ship wouldn't be able to satisfy the traffic needs of Waterfront City. At this moment, the ship gradually came to a stop. A wide and long wooden plank was placed on the ship. Immediately, a surging tide of people surged out of the ship and headed straight for the beach. The density of the crowd made Gu Fei feel like he was watching a war movie. After a long time on the ship, the players of Waterfront City had developed a good habit of disembarking first, then boarding first. In the game, everyone sat wherever they wanted, so there was no such thing as stealing seats. The order was maintained very well. After this crowd of people disembarked, they spread out on the beach. Those who obtained something valuable while leveling up turned around and walked towards the trade area on the left. Those who made new friends while leveling up called their friends over and found seats in the open-air tavern. For a time, the entire beach was bustling with activity. Many players who were selling equipment or alcohol took the initiative to attract customers. Even the hawker players who had been squatting in front of their bonfires at the edge of the beach stood up and shouted loudly. The content of their shouts was full of the game's characteristics. Hey! High-quality roasted fish worth 3,000 gold. 1 rod is only 4.5 gold. My fish was too expensive. Gu Fei was indignant. He bought fish for 5 gold per rod, but his chef mastery was only 2,700 gold. When the commotion died down and everyone returned to their respective positions, Gu Fei discovered that there were even more players staring at the 2 of them, both inside and outside the circle. You should be satisfied this time. The 6 people laughed in delight. It turned out that some of their companions had gone to level up. It was a pity that the players who were leveling up in Waterfront City couldn't be called upon and had to wait for the ship. Thus, when the ship that was returning from the level 40 leveling area reached the shore, they had a large group of people. Gu Fei swept his eyes around. The other party was at most a level 5 mercenary group with at most 100 people. If he used teleportation and ran like crazy, it shouldn't be difficult for him to escape. If he really couldn't shake them off, then he would be forced to kill them. Although it was very difficult to get around 30 PK, since the other party had given him face, he could only reluctantly do it. As Gu Fei thought of this, his expression naturally remained calm. Not only that, because there was a high possibility that he would be forced to attack, Gu Fei even faintly revealed an expression of excitement. Not allowing the PK to reach 30, this was the requirement that Gu Fei had set for himself. However, to be honest, he was naturally very annoyed by this restriction. Now that he was forced to break this restriction, it was equivalent to giving Gu Fei a sufficient reason to break the rule that he had set for himself. At this moment, after admiring the group of people, the Han family young master nodded his head and said, "There are quite a lot of people. How is it? Are you satisfied?" The other party provoked. "To be honest, I'm not very satisfied," the Han family young master said as he slowly stood up. "However, I'm a very honest person. Isn't it just a matter of having more people to bully? I will make you very satisfied." After saying this, the Han family young master straightened his arm and waved his hand. Everyone looked towards the direction where he waved. There was a large group of people in that direction, a large group of people who had just gotten off the ship. They didn't follow the main road back to the city, didn't go to the trading point, didn't come to drink, and didn't even eat grilled fish. They seemed like a group of people who were thinking about what to do next. It was rare for so many people to hesitate after getting off the ship. This was because this kind of question was enough for one to think about it 180 times during the boring time on the ship. Gu Fei also looked at this group of people, and he saw countless familiar faces. The people of Cloud City. The players of Cloud City were squirming in their direction. With so many people, it wasn't easy for them to travel through the food stalls, so they walked very slowly. However, their target was very clear. It was the direction where Gu Fei and the Han family young master were. As a result, the 6 people's mouths opened wider and wider. The people who were called over to surround Gu Fei and the Han family young master also felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over them. Their mouths opened wider and wider. Did they call these people over? These people discussed in their channel. Impossible, the 2 of them aren't people of Linshui City. How could they gather so many people in Linshui City? Someone said. Looking at the slowly approaching group of people, no matter what, they should be from a rank 5 guild. Could it be that the 2 of them know one of the bosses of Linshui City? Someone guessed. Bullshit, if that's the case, there would already be people covering for them at the wine stall. To be able to occupy a golden area by the pier and open a wine stall, there was no doubt that it was one of the most powerful guilds in Linshui City. If Gu Fei and the Han family young master really had a relationship with one of the big guilds here, then they must be one of the people who opened a wine stall here. After all, there weren't that many rank 5 guilds. In fact, this group of people had already calculated this. They believed that Gu Fei and the Han family young master were 2 outsiders who didn't have any background in the city. That was why they acted so brazenly, surrounding the most flourishing area. Unexpectedly, the other party actually had such a large group of people. It can't be fake, right? Someone was still fantasizing. However, at this moment, the group of people had already arrived in front of them. They waved their hands and greeted the Han family young master. Are you guys still not going to leave? Han family young master indifferently said as he looked at the 6 people still standing by his table. The 6 people looked at each other in dismay. They came menacingly and left in a hurry. Wasn't this too shameful? How many players had been eyeing this wine stall, and now? However, to some players, levels were insignificant, but face was more important. For this group of players who prioritized profit over prestige, levels were the most important thing. Moreover, they still had the words left behind by their ancestors to use as an excuse. Thus, everyone muttered in the chat, "A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him," and left with their tails between their legs. Subduing the enemy without fighting, that's the highest level, do you see? Han family young master said to Gu Fei. How boring. Gu Fei felt regretful that he still had to follow the rule of not being able to kill more than 30 people. At this moment, Unsworn Sword had already led his people to their table. Only now did he see that Gu Fei was also here. He was overjoyed. Brother Qianli is here too, that's great. Gu Fei was quite surprised. Recently, he had been communicating with the system guards and hadn't had a direct conversation with this boss in a long time. Why was he suddenly so enthusiastic towards him? When did this person succumb to the Han family's young master without a fight? Gu Fei thought. Looking at the crowd again, people like Sword Demon and Yutian Shenming also squeezed out to greet Gu Fei and Unsworn Sword. Obviously, these people were all around level 40. If they wanted to level up, they would of course take the same boat to the same place. At night, everyone would set off together at the same time, so naturally they would take the same boat back. This wasn't a coincidence, it was inevitable. How is it? Boss Unsworn, is everyone here? Han family young master asked Unsworn Sword. Almost, but don't worry, they're all online. They're all in the city and on the way to the pier. They won't miss the boat. Everyone rest here for a bit. Unsworn Sword's last sentence was shouted at everyone behind him. Chapter 366. The cloud computing players suffered a heavy blow in Shady Forest City. Although the players of Unhindered couldn't start over after dying, the players of the mercenary groups had to come back after dying. Although there were a few mercenary groups that felt that there was no profit to be made, the ones that would do this weren't big mercenary groups. For example, the Black Hand mercenary group was still around. Although they didn't have the grandeur of a 1,000-man team, the total number of people still reached the scale of a level 5 guild. With such a large group of people suddenly coming to this wine stall to relax, all the businessmen were overjoyed. However, the problem was that there simply weren't enough seats. Amidst the shouts of "Boss, are there any seats?" all the people setting up the stall had tears streaming down their cheeks. The fat meat was right in front of their mouths, but they couldn't eat it. This was too painful. Fortunately, the players of Cloud Peak City were already preparing to set off. They were too lazy to leave the docks, so they just sat there for a while. For example, the table that Gu Fei and the young master of the Han family were sitting at was originally a single-person table. At this moment, there were 8 people surrounding it. The wine glasses on the table were arranged as if they were having a get-together. There were people constantly being reprimanded for taking the wrong glass. This was already considered good, at least there were benches to sit on and a table to place glasses on. Most of the cloud computing players directly sat on the beach, holding their wine glasses in their hands. When the businessmen of Waterfront City saw that these fellows actually didn't mind not having a seat, they were naturally elated. They happily served wine, expressed their apologies, and attached a portion of the discount. For a time, the atmosphere was joyous and harmonious. At Gu Fei's table, apart from Gu Fei and the 6 people from the Child Elite group, there were also Unsworn Sword and Feng Xing. Gu Fei was a bit confused. Why did this Unsworn Sword suddenly like to poke into their group? Gu Fei raised this question in the mercenary channel. The Han family young master smiled darkly and said, "Subduing the enemy without fighting, didn't I teach you?" Gu Fei cursed in his heart and quickly closed the channel. At this time, the leaders of the Han family young master and Oathless Sword had already begun their discussion. "How was it? Did you discover anything with Jian Nanyu yesterday?" asked the Han family young master. "Jian Nanyu? One of the 5 experts? Is he in Linshui City?" Gu Fei asked in surprise. Everyone looked at him strangely. "You know each other?" Gu Fei continued to ask. "Well, he's a friend of mine," said Brother Yu. "How are your skills?" Gu Fei asked Brother Yu. "Well, I'm no match for you," said Brother Yu. "How would you know if you haven't tried?" Gu Fei's eyes shone. "I tried." Brother Yu nodded and said, "Didn't you do a wanted mission last night?" He was the one who cooperated with the guards to clean up the mess. Gu Fei was in a daze. Of course, he wouldn't forget such a person so quickly. It was just that it was such a coincidence that he was surprised. On the other side, the Han family young master no longer paid attention to him and continued to ask Oathless Sword the same question. Oathless Sword was extremely excited as he said, "Brother Han, this time, it's all thanks to you for suggesting to meet this big shot. Last night, after Jian Nanyu came out, I immediately contacted him. Then, he brought me to the wanted mission office to ask around. Sure enough. Fucking system, there's another 2-way mission in Linshui City. However, we were lucky this time. The one who took the mission was a small rank 3 guild. Afterwards, Jian Nanyu brought me along to pay a visit. In order to save face, the other party directly gave up on the mission. We're too lucky. If that's the case, then there won't be another mission like this, right? Asked Brother Yu. No, after that brother gave up on the mission, I immediately went to take a look at the mission office. It didn't appear again. Afterwards, I even took turns to keep an eye on it with a few brothers. It definitely didn't appear again. Oathless Sword said with satisfaction. So, this Linshui City trial was passed so easily? Everyone felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Of course, Oathless Sword said as he lifted his leg and kicked someone beside him. Did nothing happen when I led this guy to level? When Oathless Sword was complacent, his loathsome aura once again appeared. The 6 of them ignored him. They looked at the guy who didn't react at all after he kicked him. It was actually Todd. "You're quite daring. You just brought him to level like this?" "Brother," you said. "In the beginning, I only wanted to try it out. In the end, the more I tried, the safer it became. This is enough to prove that there's no more suspense in Linshui City." Oathless Sword said. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. "Actually, the other party is just an ordinary rank 3 guild. They can't compare to Deepwater's group in Shady Forest City. If they really want to make things difficult for us, they don't have enough strength. Since someone accepted the mission, why didn't anything happen when we arrived here yesterday?" Brother Yu expressed his puzzlement. "It's all thanks to this place's special environment," Han Family Young Master said. "We came here on the system's passenger ship. Even if the other party has the system's information, what ability do they have to intercept the system's large ship on the water? You guys have also seen this side of the pier. If they want to group fight here, it's a dead end. This is the area enveloped by the strongest forces in Linshui City. After that, we'll enter the city and turn around and we'll reach the dungeon. It's close, really close. How could they have the opportunity to attack?" Brother Han's analysis is correct. Oathless Sword was full of praise. After praising them, he looked at the time and frowned. "It's almost time to set sail." After saying this, he turned back to look at the road leading to the city gate. His brows immediately relaxed. At this time, the players who stayed in Cloud City had already arrived. "Brothers, it's almost time." Oathless Sword fiercely stood up and shouted in a grand manner. The Cloud City players who were sitting on the ground heard his shout and stood up one after another. Under the countless gazes of strangers, Oathless Sword felt that he was in a daze and wanted to say a few more words. However, the next step was to board the ship. There was no need for any major mobilization. For a moment, he couldn't form any words. In the end, he only shouted, "Everyone, prepare to board the ship." Everyone raised their cups and drank it in one gulp. Then they turned around and walked towards the pier. As for which pier they should go to, they had already investigated and informed everyone. "We're leaving just like that? It's not even 7 o'clock yet," Gu Fei said. "There's no other way. This place is special. The ship doesn't wait for people." Brother Yu patted him. This ship was carrying players out of Linshui City. It had long since docked at the pier. There didn't seem to be any passengers on board. This wasn't strange. Players rarely moved between the main cities of the parallel world. Therefore, the business of this giant ferry couldn't be compared to the business of the leveling area. The players lined up and paid the fee to the NPC at the pier before boarding the ship one after another. When Gu Fei boarded the ship, he scanned the observation deck and the cockpit. He discovered that the NPCs were directly in charge of the ship. It was unknown how many times the players of Cloud City had boarded the ship. They seemed to be very familiar with the route. After boarding the ship, they immediately formed their own groups and divided their territories. Some drank, some chatted, some played cards, and some even brought back grilled fish. This was Gu Fei's first time. Thinking about Shi Xiaotian and Boundless Mang, who traveled with him yesterday, it should also be their first time. He subconsciously searched the crowd, but to no avail. There were simply too many people. It wasn't easy to find the 2 players. The only thing Gu Fei could confirm was that the 2 players were online, so they should be on the ship. After looking around, Gu Fei still didn't see anything. He was too lazy to send any messages to ask, so he found a place to sit down. After everyone boarded the ship, it stopped for another 10 minutes. The ship began to slowly leave the shore. Gu Fei heard Unsworn Sword bragging again. How was it?" "I calculated it perfectly. I didn't waste anyone's time, right?" The target of Unsworn Sword's bragging was his favorite mercenary group leader, Gu Xiaoshang. "Can't you be quiet?" Gu Xiaoshang said as he turned his head to the side. Unsworn Sword immediately quieted down. In an instant, he had turned from a powerful guild leader to a lackey among the masses. Gu Fei couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, on the golden beach of Waterside City, A person with a shield on his back and a long sword at his waist stood with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He quietly watched as the ship slowly left the dock. The azure seawater continuously slapped against his feet, but he didn't feel it at all. Behind him, there were people pointing at him from time to time in the bustling wine stalls. Danan. At this moment, a few players ran to the shore and called out to him. Ken and Yu turned around. There were 6 players behind him. They were the 6 most elite players among his companions. Has his identity been confirmed? One of them asked. He's a video mage. Ken and Yu replied. What about his equipment? Another person asked. It's as the report said. We can't identify him. Ken and Yu said. High-level equipment? Definitely. No wonder the bounty is so high. But, another person said hesitantly, he's a friend of your friend. Friends are friends, business is business. Ken and Yu said calmly. Then why don't we take action in Waterside City? Another person said. Are you crazy? Don't you see how many people they have? Ken and Yu said. Then what do we do? Get on the next boat and follow them to the next stop. Ken and Yu said, that's their last stop. Whether they complete or fail the mission, it's time for them to disband. The last stop? How do you know? Have you contacted the informant in their team? Another person asked. Ken and Yu nodded. Last night. I've already understood the general situation. Ken and Yu said. So, we can also clearly grasp the movements of the video mage? That's right. But if we wait for the next boat, won't it be too late? Since it's the last stage, they can complete the mission as soon as they get off the boat. There's no need to wait until tomorrow, right? Ken and Yu smiled. Don't worry, how can the last stage's mission be so easy to complete? Butterfly Knot. The Burning Crusade has finally reached the last stage. Can we clear it? Chapter 367. Is this a guess, or do you have any accurate information? Someone asked. The last stage of the game was often the most difficult, so it was normal to make such a deduction. Jianan nodded and said, there is information. Is it also provided by an informant? Someone asked. No, they don't know what they are facing in the last stage. Even I only received the news after they left the shore. Jianan said. What news? The moment they left the shore, a new mercenary mission appeared in their next stop, the mercenary building in Sunset City. The content is to assassinate the target they are protecting. Jianan said. Mercenary mission? These guys have more people than a 5th-rank guild. How can a mercenary group contend against them? Someone was puzzled. Jianan smiled and said, this is an indiscriminate mercenary mission. Everyone said, oh. They were also very familiar with mercenary missions. There were 2 characteristics of indiscriminate mercenary missions. One was that there were no requirements for the mercenary group that accepted the mission. The second was that there was no limit to the number of mercenary groups that accepted the mission. However, in the end, only one person could complete the mission and only one person could obtain the reward. Therefore, there was competition. This kind of mission could be said to be a two-way street. In theory, it could cause hundreds of mercenary groups to fight each other. However, the rules were dead and people were alive. Every time this kind of rare mission appeared, experienced mercenary groups would not waste their energy on internal strife. Generally, there would be a few relatively strong mercenary groups forming an alliance to take the lead in the competition. After completing the mission, they would divide the reward. This kind of mission had extremely high rewards. Moreover, the rewards of mercenary missions had always been transparent. When receiving the mission, one would know what the reward was, so there was no need to worry about the mercenary group that completed the mission. Even so, I don't know how many mercenary groups will join hands and whether they can form such a large army. There were still people who were worried. Don't forget about Sunset City's 100 Battles mercenary group. Jianan said. The 100 Realms mercenary group. Someone had already begun to suck in a breath of cold air. Although this 100 Battles mercenary group's fame had not yet spread throughout the parallel world, as a neighbor of Sunset City, they had heard of it. Of course, he didn't know much about the details. He only knew that this mercenary group was extremely powerful. It was said that this group of people were really good at fighting. Some said they were a bunch of hooligans, some said they were a group of martial arts dojos, and some said they were retired soldiers and so on. Jian Nanyu had dealt with them in the course of business. Although he didn't know where these people came from, he definitely agreed that their skills were extraordinary. Moreover, Jian Nanyu had only seen a few random people in the 100 Battles mercenary group. As for their leader, Bai Jingluan, who was also one of the 5 strong men, he didn't dare to imagine how strong he was. Thinking about this mercenary group, South Ranger's brothers started to worry about the players in Cloud City. Such a strong opponent, they'll be dead by the time we get off work. Well, that's a problem. That guy's PK value is 29. Once he dies, he'll probably die on the spot. There's no point in us looking for him. South Sword said. Let's not wait for the ship to get off work. Let's hurry up and find a ship. We're already so far away, they shouldn't be able to see us. One person looked at the giant ship that was gradually blurring in the mist. Okay, hurry and call a ship. After Jian Nanyu said this, they hurriedly left the beach. They could take a player-made boat, but they didn't have to come to this dock. Not long after they left, the ferry from the direction of Forest Shade City docked at the dock, and a group of people got off the boat. The scene of Waterside City's dock bustling with activity attracted the attention of these outsiders. The businessmen stationed at the dock didn't know why so many outsiders had come to Waterside City in the past 2 days. Of course, they didn't want to find out. They just wanted to make a big profit from these outsiders. Waterside City's unique commercial and leisure area was generally able to stimulate the spending desire of outsiders. However, after this group of people got off the boat, they weren't in a hurry to try it out. Instead, they grabbed the Waterside City players who came up to solicit business and asked when the ship to Sunset City would arrive. It just left. The next one will leave in about 4 hours. If you guys are waiting for the ship, why don't you come to our stall and sit for a while? This guy happened to be one of the players who opened a wine stall. After the other party asked about the situation of the ship, he lost no time in soliciting business. Is there any other way? The other party's leader asked. Occasionally, some people will use their own boats to do the ferry business. However, there are so many of you here, I'm afraid this method won't work. As this guy spoke, he counted the number of people in the other party. At a glance, he was secretly amazed. This group of people could be said to be almost entirely archers, with only a few thieves and mages sprinkled in. This kind of team was really unusual. Can we only wait here for 4 hours? The other party's leader muttered. Why don't we sit here for a while? Depth of water. Someone in the same group suggested. Many people were already eager to try the style of this beach. Depth of water. The eyes of the players who listened to the other party couldn't help but light up. This guy who led a team of archers with a face full of dust was one of the 5 roaches, the #1 archer in the parallel world, Depth of Water. However, all of this was already in the past. Countless people were very concerned about the level rankings, and Depth's loss of a level was already a well-known secret. Of course, everyone was very curious about how such an amazing character had died. At this moment, seeing such a big shot appear in Waterside City, everyone stretched their necks to look around, whispering to each other. Then let's sit here and wait for the ship. Depth of Water helplessly spread out his hands. He first picked a random seat, but didn't buy any wine. Instead, he asked the wine seller about some of the situation in Waterside City. Oh, that big group of people? They just boarded Sunset City's ship and left. When asked about the situation of Cloud's group, the wine seller said, Damn, just a little bit more time? This system is so cheap. It deliberately made the arrival and departure times of the 2 ships a little different, making us waste time here. Bitch, 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 bitch. Depth of Water couldn't help but curse. Even if we just happen to make it, we can't possibly board the same ship as them, right? Someone reminded Depth of Water. I'm talking about the problem of the system being cheap. Isn't this the truth? Depth of Water roared. It's very cheap. Countless voices responded, and most of them were Waterside City players. Boss, You've already asked your question. What wine do you want? The wine seller said at this moment. Wine. Depth of Water's expression turned cold. I've already decided to completely quit this thing. Go ask them. Depth of Water and his group waited at the wine stall on the beach for the next ship. Jian Nan and the others went to find a few self-made boats and rowed away. The ship that Gu Fei and the others were on was still floating on the water at this time. As long as they delivered Todd to Sunset City's dungeon, the quest would be successfully completed. As the guild leader of Unsworn Sword, he couldn't hide his excitement at this moment. He rubbed against Gu Xiaoshang for a while, but didn't seem to be in a good mood. He tactfully retreated and began to wander between the mercenary groups, expressing his gratitude to the remaining mercenary groups. Because some of the mercenary groups chose to withdraw midway and return the commission, Unsworn Sword saved a lot of money. At this moment, Unsworn Sword was in a good mood and took the initiative to promise to pay more after the quest was completed. However, the reaction of the mercenary groups was mediocre. To be honest, the reasons given by the mercenary groups that withdrew were deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. No mercenary group would willingly participate in such a troublesome and dangerous quest just for a small amount of money. Everyone was thinking about the unexpected benefits that could be obtained from such a large chain of quests. In the end, they encountered a boss in the first stage, but how could a boss be split among 1,000 people? The few items that the boss dropped were all picked up by Gu Fei. In the eyes of most people, the second stage, the werewolf, was passed without much of a reward. Gu Fei, on the other hand, had obtained something from the werewolf. This was something that no one knew about. If they knew, they would be even more indignant. As for the third stage, the two-way quest became the fuse. When the mercenary groups saw that not only did they not obtain any of the rewards that they were looking forward to, but many of their companions lost levels and suffered heavy losses, some of them finally couldn't help but quit. At this time, the mercenary groups that stayed on to continue the quest were no longer fantasizing about the unexpected benefits that would come from this lousy quest. There were only those that valued their reputation, such as the Black Hand mercenary group, those that had a bit of friendship with Unsworn Sword and didn't come here solely for the money, such as Gu Xiaoshang's mercenary group, or those that had obtained countless benefits from this quest, such as the Child Elite group. These people weren't very interested in Unsworn Sword's promise to give more gold, and their reactions were mediocre. Unsworn Sword had been snubbed after circling around, but it didn't affect his mood much. He continued to wander around in high spirits. On the other hand, Reflection of Years, who was already in Cloud City, sent him a message worriedly, "It's almost the last stage. Don't be careless. It'll be a pity if we fail at this point." Half of the journey from Waterside City to Sunset City was by water, and the other half was by land. The ship floated for about an hour, and finally reached the pier in the direction of Sunset City. This pier was more than an hour away from Sunset City, and besides this passenger ship to Waterside City, there were no other flights, so it was impossible to form a beach market like the one in Waterside City. After the group disembarked, Unsworn Sword identified the direction and walked in the direction of Sunset City. They didn't have the slightest bit of carelessness along the way. Not long after, someone had already noticed that someone was following them. It's the players. Unsworn Sword, who received this news, felt very comforted. He was originally worried that the last stage would be some kind of NPC big boss, and if it was a super OP, they might not be able to handle it. But now that he knew that the players were moving in secret, it seemed like it was another two-way quest like the previous two stages. The stage in Shady Forest City was only because the special environment created a group of special jungle killers, which made the players in Cloud City suffer a great loss. If it was just a direct confrontation between guilds under normal circumstances, the players in Cloud City were more than level 5 guilds. Now that it was the last stage, there was no need to worry about the lack of support. So after estimating that it was another two-way quest, Unsworn Sword was very calm. Chapter 368. There were only a few players who had the same mentality as Unsworn Sword. Most of them were on high alert when they saw someone sneaking up on them, especially the mercenary players who had been sacrificed before. There was no longer any suspense as to what the reward of this quest would be. It would be the bounty that Unsworn Sword would give. They were already unhappy that they had to sacrifice a level for that bounty, and it was absolutely intolerable that they had to sacrifice another level. These players, with their own selfish motives, erupted with an incomparable fighting spirit. Boss Unsworn, let's do it. We've been too passive before, and now that we've come to this point, it's time for us to take the initiative. It's better to kill the wrong person than to have any suspense. Who cares what these people's motives are? Let's kill them first. Oathless Sword had never been a kind-hearted person. He would only place his own interests above all else. He was even willing to sacrifice his fellow mercenaries, let alone these random bystanders. Hearing this brother's suggestion, Oathless Sword immediately issued an order in the guild channel. At present, these sneaky players were only moving at a certain distance from them. There were 4 groups of them, each with 5 or 6 people, and they were all professions with excellent speed. Since there was a distance, the best way to attack was naturally the 4 Seas arrow formation. Although they had lost half of their power in Shady Forest City, it was by no means a dispensable existence. These godly archers had always been walking together, ready to attack at any time. Now that Unsworn Sword had issued an order, they did not ask any questions and immediately stopped in their tracks. They spread out in formation, turned around, and knocked their arrows. A wave of arrows flew straight into the sky. The wandering players did not seem to expect the other side to suddenly attack. The godly archers of the 4 Seas were well trained, and it only took them a moment to get into position and shoot the arrows. By the time these people reacted, they were already under the cover of the arrows. A white light suddenly appeared on the ground. Unsworn Sword did not care about the other side's life or death. He only asked the godly archers who had launched the attack, "Any PK points?" "No." All the godly archers reported happily after checking their data. This was very clear. Killing people but not increasing PK points was clearly a two-way quest. These people really did not come with good intentions. After gaining a firm foothold in terms of morality, Unsworn Sword became even more spirited. He drew the long sword at his waist and pointed it at a small group of people on the other side. "Shoot!" Unsworn Sword shouted proudly. In the eyes of the bystanders, he was extremely lewd. This group of people had already been alerted after the previous group had been killed and were preparing to flee. However, as mentioned earlier, the crisscrossing 4 Seas archer formation was well trained, and their movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had already adjusted their position. A wave of arrows rained down, and 5 of the 6 people in this group had died. Only one person continued to limp as he ran. A few random archers shot another wave of arrows in unison and eliminated him. The remaining 2 groups did not hesitate at this time and had already scattered in all directions. Even the arrow formation of crisscrossing the 4 Seas could not cover such a large area, so they could only choose a target and fire in unison. Most of them were killed by the arrows, and a few managed to escape the shooting range. They looked back at the people from Cloud City in horror. "Haha, these guys, I think they are too careless." Unsworn Sword laughed as he spoke to the people around him. He waved his hand to signal them to continue moving forward, and said, "Their opponents are too inexperienced. It won't be like Waterside City, where a small guild picked up this big mission, right?" The players around Unsworn Sword laughed along, but they also felt that Unsworn Sword's thoughts were not too optimistic. No matter which main city, the lower the level of the guild, the more guilds there would be. This was inevitable. If this mission did not have any requirements for the guild's level, then the chances of it being picked up by a small guild would naturally be much higher. At this time, the members of the Child Elite group were also expressing their opinions. "Brother Yu, did you manage to appraise the person just now?" Han Family Young Master asked Brother Yu first. As soon as they opened fire just now, Brother Yu also rushed out of the group like an arrow. If he had a camera in his hand, he would really be a typical paparazzi. Most players would be ashamed of their low level and poor equipment, but Brother Yu was not. As the king of intelligence, he was pained by the fact that his appraisal skill was not top-notch. In the child elite group, he was not as good as Sword Demon at one point. For this reason, he had put in a lot of hard work, and he had reached the highest level that he was at, which was not easy. It was already rare for some experts to be able to raise their level and take care of this kind of support skill at the same time. Most people, on the other hand, prioritized their level and could make up for it when their level was higher in the future. This was the most mainstream way of thinking. As for those like Brother Yu who were determined to walk at the forefront of the tide, there were very few of them. At this time, he rushed forward with all his might, wanting to play a role. It was not considered a failure. Now that the appraisal skills level was higher, apart from having a higher accuracy and success rate, the distance that could be carried out had also increased. At that moment, Brother Yu had successfully rushed into his appraisal range. Then, with 2 consecutive claps, he appraised 2 people consecutively. His speed was also extremely fast. Brother Yu proudly thought that this was his ultimate technique of 2 consecutive attacks. However, when he turned around and returned to the group, he saw a figure that behaved similarly to him. Brother Yu recognized that it was Miss Lu Xia, who was reborn as Amethyst. It was not easy for Brother Yu to have a fan. Of course, he would not forget that this lady also had such pursuers. When he realized that he was not alone, Brother Yu felt very gratified. As soon as he returned to the group, the Han family young master asked him about it. When Brother Yu flipped through the recording of the consecutive shots just now, he was stunned at first. Level 33, level 32. Isn't this too inexperienced? Brother Yu was surprised. Such a low level. Everyone was even more shocked. At this stage of the game, it would be polite to say that this level was inexperienced. Currently, players generally believed that the game had just begun after level 30. I wonder what Lu Xia saw, Brother Yu muttered. Let me ask. Gu Fei also saw Lu Xia, which was why she rushed out like Brother Yu. He guessed that this lady also went to search for information. It's the same. It's the same level. Gu Fei did not mention the number. It was just a concept. The few of them looked at each other. They really picked up a treasure in the last stage? Brother Yu said, then we won't be able to earn anything, right? Unscathed in battle pretended to be depressed. Yu Tian, did you see anything? The Han family's young master asked Imperial Divine Cry. This guy didn't go to the unhindered 4 Seas arrow formation. When the other mercenary groups launched their attack, the archers only shot 2 arrows at him, but he didn't move at all. He just stared at them with wide eyes. I didn't see anything, Yu Tian Shenming said. Is that so? The Han family young master asked again. Is there a hidden meaning in your words? Yu Tian Shenming shivered. You didn't even see their guild badge? Han family young master asked. I don't think so. Yu Tian Shenming said. I didn't see it either. Brother Yu was much more confident. As expected of someone who searched for information. Even if he didn't notice it, he would save a thought so that he could save it and load the file. Even though he didn't have eagle eyes, he had gotten quite a bit closer. Now that he thought about it, he didn't see any guild badge on them. Should we ask Lu Xia to confirm? Gu Fei also knew that this was a big problem. The guild badge in the parallel world was given by the system. It wasn't a requirement for players to wear it. Some guild badges were ugly, so players weren't willing to wear them. For example, crisscross. However, when a large-scale guild war broke out, everyone would consciously wear the badge. This was because there were hundreds of players in a guild in the game. Even the guild leader would have a hard time recognizing everyone. Moreover, PK didn't have the protection of the same party or guild, so they could only rely on the badge to identify each other. Wear the badge and charge. This was the slogan that every guild leader was very familiar with. If it was a long-range battle, then not wearing it would be fine. However, once it was a close combat battle, not wearing it would be asking for trouble. With so few people, they must be here to check out the situation. They don't have any intention of fighting us, right? So wearing the badge doesn't mean anything. Yu Tian Shenming's analysis was quite relevant. Look, Crisscross didn't wear it. Little Wimp even learned to give examples. Indeed, it doesn't mean anything, but we have to be careful. Han family young master said as he went to look for Unsworn Sword. No badge. With Unsworn Sword's vast experience, he naturally understood what Imperial Divine Hymn was implying. However, he quickly followed Imperial Divine Hymn's train of thought. The melee hasn't started yet, so it's not surprising that they aren't wearing it. Look, no one in our guild is wearing it. That's because your badges are too ugly. That's why all of you are used to it. Unless you have no other choice, you won't wear it. Han family young master pointed out mercilessly. I'm sorry. Unsworn Sword laughed dryly. I also admit that they might not be ready to wear it. However, since we have already discovered it, we should be prepared for another situation. Han family young master said calmly. You are saying that they are a mercenary group? A mercenary group that is fighting against us for a two-way mission? Unsworn Sword laughed. This kind of situation is negligible. There is no need to prepare at all. Han family young master said calmly. Then what else is there? Unsworn Sword was confused. Han family young master didn't say anything. He looked at Black Index Finger, the leader of Black Hand mercenary group. Black Index Finger had been listening to their conversation for a long time. When he saw Han family young master looking at him, he nodded and said, Han brothers, you are thinking of competing for the mercenary mission? Han family young master nodded. Although Unsworn Sword was mainly focused on attacking guilds, and his mercenary business was handled by Shadow Years, it was not to the extent that he had never heard of this quest. From his expression, it was clear that he knew how scary this quest was. If that's the case, it's going to be troublesome. Unsworn Sword changed his tone. It's not too troublesome. Han family young master smiled. At least it's not competing for the guild mission indiscriminately. Chapter 369. Unsworn Sword immediately ordered the team to slow down. Then, he gathered a bunch of leaders and told them about this important discovery. Indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions. All of the mercenary leaders muttered to themselves. In fact, most of them had never experienced this kind of mission before. When they mentioned it, they actually felt a bit envious. But we can't be sure. Gu Xiaoshang said, maybe they're a guild, just not wearing a badge. Xiaoshang, you're thinking the same thing as me again. Unsworn Sword said emotionally. Don't speak nonsense again. Gu Xiaoshang said angrily. The current situation is like this. Han family young master said disapprovingly, we can already confirm that the opponent is part of a two-way mission. If it's a single mercenary group, the threat can be ignored. If it's a guild, then we've already identified 4 people, and they're all around level 32. May I ask which guild would accept players that are just over level 30? Everyone listened and nodded in agreement. Take Unhindered for example. For a guild like theirs that had already reached level 5, their average level had already stepped into the realm of level 40. Guilds that were slightly weaker than them would at most have a few level 37 or 38 players. In their eyes, a level 30 player was basically a beginner noob. Big guilds simply wouldn't accept such a low-level player. What the Han brothers mean is, regardless of whether the opponent is a single mercenary group or a guild, we can be sure that the opponent is not a threat to us. So, what we need to worry about is the situation of indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions. Unsworn Sword said. Han family young master nodded. If that's the case, then those few people just now are just stragglers. The real threat hasn't even arrived yet. Unsworn Sword said. If it's an indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions, then we need to understand which of the stronger mercenary groups are here. Guild leader Unsworn, you guys must have done this kind of homework, right? Han family young master said. Of course we have. Unsworn Sword said with a serious expression. Speaking of mercenary groups, there is a very famous one in Sunset City called the 100 Battles Mercenary Group. The leader is one of the 5 Roaches, 100 Battles Mercenary Group. In Sunset City, the status of the 100 Battles Mercenary Corps was even higher than that of their strongest guild, Fallen Leaves Roots. This is unimaginable in any main city. He's that strong. Everyone was shocked. One had to know that guilds and mercenary groups were completely different in terms of numbers. For a mercenary group to be able to suppress the strongest guild, didn't that mean that each member of the mercenary group had the strength to fight against multiple guilds? More importantly, everyone believed that the strength of the strongest mercenary corps in each main city should be about the same. The 100 Battles Mercenary Corps could suppress the strongest mercenary corps in Sunset City, and perhaps even surpass the current unhindered 4 Cs. Unsworn Sword continued to describe his understanding of this mercenary group. From the outside, the biggest feature of this mercenary group is that Grandmasters of Combat make up a large portion of the group. Many Grandmasters of Combat. The people who heard this information were a little stunned. During the open beta period, the Grandmaster of Combat was the weakest class in the parallel world. Although the situation had changed after the official launch, the newcomers had yet to reach the top of the game. Therefore, among the high-level players, the Grandmaster of Combat was the least. This also led to a considerable number of players having very little experience fighting Grandmasters of Combat. Some people had not even piked with a Grandmaster of Combat until now. It can't be a coincidence that they have so many Grandmasters of Combat. Is there something strange about this mercenary group? Luluo asked. According to rumors, this mercenary group is very good at fighting. Some say they are a gang of gangsters, some say they are a group of martial arts dojos, and some say they are retired soldiers. Unsworn Sword's understanding of this information was exactly the same as Jiannan's. Everyone looked at each other. How should they deal with such an opponent? No one had any idea. Just as they were helpless, the players in front of the team sent a message. Someone is blocking the way. Protectad. Unsworn Sword hurriedly shouted, then took the lead and ran to the front of the team. As he ran, he made arrangements. How the arrow formation should advance with silent steps, how the thieves should circle around, how the priests should position themselves, how the mages and warriors should coordinate, and which direction the mercenary group was in charge of. Unsworn Sword gave a series of orders in one breath, but the more he moved forward, the more surprised his companions who received the orders looked at him. Finally, Unsworn Sword came to the front of the team. With a glance at the legendary roadblock, he immediately understood why his brothers were so surprised. 5 people. There were only 5 players blocking the way in the middle of the road, stopping the team of players from above the clouds. Facing 5 people, Unsworn Sword made such a grand arrangement. It was no wonder that his brothers were surprised. Raining the 4 Cs arrow formation was already ready. Seeing that their guild master had also squeezed to the front, they immediately sent a message asking, "Guild Master, do we attack now?" Unsworn Sword glanced at the 5 people. For Grandmasters of Combat and 1 warrior, he had already guessed their origins. In that case, his judgment of competing for mercenary missions without discrimination was not wrong at all. Wait for my order. After Unsworn Sword spoke to the archers of arrow formation, he stepped forward and looked at the 5 people. These 5 people looked calm. Unsworn Sword did not know if it was a psychological effect, but he just felt that these 5 people seemed to be very imposing just by standing there casually. Unsworn Sword finally spoke. "You 5 must be members of Sunset City's 100 Battles mercenary group? I didn't expect guests from outside the city to be able to recognize us at a glance," one of the 5 said without batting an eyelid. "What advice do you have?" This was a question that he already knew the answer to. Mission. This was a simple answer to the other party's words. Just the 5 of you? Unsworn Sword looked around cautiously. He felt that there must be some kind of ambush around them. No matter how strong they were, 5 people could take care of hundreds of them. "We wouldn't dare." The other party replied, "The 5 of us are here to say hello. At the same time, we can also show you our skills so that you can be mentally prepared." Unsworn Sword frowned. "How do you want to see?" "It's very simple. You can randomly pick a few people to spar with us brothers." The other party said, "So what if we win? So what if we lose?" Unsworn Sword said, "The main thing is to let you know our strength first. As for winning or losing, it doesn't matter. Because how can you win? The other party's words were very arrogant, but there was not a trace of arrogance in his tone and demeanor. "Let me try." Feng Xing could no longer hold back and jumped out from the team. Unsworn Sword wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Feng Xing rushed towards the other party with big steps. Unsworn Sword thought it was fine. He would take this opportunity to see what the other party's legendary fighting skills were all about. Feng Xing seemed to be rushing fiercely, but in fact he did not use his full strength. He intended to suddenly accelerate after getting close to the opponent, catching them off guard. The target he wanted to attack was the second person from the left of the five, the one who had been talking the whole time. Seeing Feng Xing rushing up, the others thought that the other party had 5 people, and Feng Xing would inevitably be at a disadvantage if he went alone. Therefore, without waiting for Unsworn Sword's order, some players who were close to Feng Xing jumped out and prepared to help. However, although the other party had 5 people, only one person made a move, and that was the one Feng Xing wanted to attack. Before Feng Xing reached him, he had already taken the initiative to attack. He also flashed out with big steps, and his speed was no slower than Feng Xing's. "Hey!" Seeing that the distance between the two of them was not far, Feng Xing abruptly took 2 steps forward, and then launched a galloping horse shooting star. Seeing this, the other party's expression changed slightly. He immediately steadied his feet and twisted his body. After galloping out, although the general direction could not be changed, the direction of his fist could still be controlled. Feng Xing hurriedly crossed his arm, trying to hit the other party when he passed by him. However, this move seemed to have been predicted by the other party. Before Feng Xing's arm reached him, the other party had already lowered his body and swept his leg. Feng Xing's arm didn't hit the person, but his leg was swept by the other party's leg. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. Feng Xing's galloping horse shooting star hadn't finished yet, but it was interrupted by the other party's leg sweep. This meant that the other party's attack had higher priority than galloping horse shooting star. This was just a normal attack. This Grandmaster of Combat in front of him actually added strength? Not many people played the Grandmaster of Combat, so there were few arguments about adding points to the class. Most people agreed on adding agility and spirit. For any class, the strength was reflected in the skills. No one would use normal attacks to conquer the world, and the damage output of Grandmasters of Combat skills was not outstanding. Although adding points to strength could increase the damage, the biggest advantage of the Grandmaster of Combat was the short cooldown time of the skills. The general rule of online games was that the more outstanding the characteristics of one's class was, the more powerful it would be. Countless people researched this, and according to the system's introduction, finally came up with the Grandmaster of Combat combo. This method could make up for the lack of damage output, and more importantly, it was very cool, so it was immediately loved by the public. Since then, everyone had focused on spirit, and agility was, of course, an essential element for creating a combo. Therefore, there was no dispute about adding points to these two. However, today Feng Xing, who was also a famous Grandmaster of Combat on the ranking list, encountered a non-mainstream method of adding points. Before he could criticize the other party's mistake, he staggered. The other party had already seized the opportunity, bounced up, and kicked Feng Xing right in the middle of his back. Feng Xing, who was already unstable, immediately flew out like a kite with a broken string. Feng Xing! The players who rushed out of the crowd to help didn't expect Feng Xing to be kicked away so easily. They hurriedly wielded their weapons and came to his rescue. Chapter 370. However, after the opponent sent Feng Xing flying with a kick, he did not immediately chase after him. Instead, he allowed the reinforcements who were further away from Feng Xing to rush over and protect him. Feng Xing was in a sorry state, but he knew that he was not badly injured. The opponent's sweep and kick were all ordinary attacks. It was only because the opponent had added points into his strength that he looked more impressive than an ordinary Grandmaster of Combat. In fact, he was not seriously injured at all. Under the concerned gazes of the people around him, Feng Xing stood up with an ashamed look on his face. On the other side, Unsworn Sword was also shocked. He and Feng Xing were old brothers, and they knew each other very well. No one knew better than him how powerful Feng Xing was. Seeing a nameless small fry kick Feng Xing to the ground with only 2 steps, Ji Hao realized that the power of this 100 battles mercenary group wasn't just a bluff. Or could it be that the person in front of him was actually a follower, pretending to be a follower to mislead the opponent into thinking that they were strong? Unsworn Sword could not help but think this way. He was too confident in Feng Xing's strength, and did not want to believe that he would be easily defeated by a small fry. Thinking of this, Unsworn Sword winked at the people who had jumped out. These people were all old subordinates of Unsworn Sword, and they immediately understood what he meant. They all shouted, "Let's learn from him," and swarmed forward. Their target was not only the one who sent Feng Xing flying, but also the 4 people who were standing next to him. Unsworn Sword also stared at the 4 people. He wanted to see if all of them were so strong, or if only one of them was deliberately mystifying. This time, there were more people who attacked. Feng Xing stood still, and there were 11 other people who rushed up. They were all melee professions. They were divided into groups and looked for opponents in pairs. Big guilds always bullied others with numbers. They disdained doing undignified things like one-on-one duels. However, although there were many people, the result was still not good. The 5 opponents were all very agile. Even the warrior in the middle could be seen to have added points into his agility. Of the 11 people who rushed up, some were beaten to the ground, some were kicked to the ground, and some were sent flying. This time, however, his opponent didn't just use a normal attack like the previous one. Instead, he used a skill as a decoration. For example, the warrior had used charge, and the player who had been knocked away was the only one who had sustained heavy injuries. He was unable to get up for a long time. Just like Feng Xing, the others also realized that although they had been knocked down to the ground, they hadn't been harmed too badly. Therefore, they all had the ability to continue the fight. Just like when Feng Xing was knocked down, the enemies didn't chase up to kill Ji Hao and Feng Xing. Instead, they stayed right where they were. Unsworn Sword frowned and signaled the others with his eyes. Thus, other than the heavily injured one who was still lying on the ground, the rest of the people rushed forward. Unsworn Sword wanted to see if their side would gain some experience after being defeated by the other side once and gain some ability to deal with them. The reality was really cruel. Those who rushed up again were beaten into a sorry state after 2 clangs. Just as Unsworn Sword and the others closed their eyes and couldn't bear to watch, they suddenly heard a sound from their side. This sound contained an extremely pleasant surprise, making Unsworn Sword very, very unhappy. Immediately, he glared at the source of the sound and saw a smiling face. It was actually Gu Fei. This made Unsworn Sword speechless. He didn't dare offend Lord Gu Fei right now. At this time, after a series of "I-O" sounds, the group of people who had come out to fight fell to the ground for the second time. The other side still didn't chase up to kill them, and instead stood obediently where they were. Unsworn Sword finally understood that when the other side said that he wanted to let them understand the strength, it wasn't just for show, nor was it arrogant. It was the truth. Now, Unsworn Sword had a very good understanding of the other side's strength. Strong, very strong indeed. Even Feng Xing, a core member of their side, was easily defeated by them. How many people in their side could be stronger than Feng Xing? If this mercenary group really had hundreds of such people, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they could suppress an entire guild. Unsworn Sword's palms were a little sweaty, but it seemed that the other side was still waiting for someone to come out. Unsworn Sword was no longer in the mood to send people out to humiliate himself. He had already decided to kill them. Just as he was about to summon an arrow formation, he didn't expect that Gu Fei had already walked out of the crowd and slowly walked up to the 5 people. Unsworn Sword's eyes lit up again. This was because Gu Fei seemed to be incomparably valiant in terms of skills. He often fought one against many. Look at how dazzling his PK value was. Although he was a mage, everyone now knew that mages didn't walk the normal path. They would always rush in front of you and slash at you with their swords. Let him try. If he can't do it, then I'll directly send 500 people to devour these 5 people. Let's see if one of them can fight 100, unsworn sword thought to himself. At this time, Gu Fei had already entered the battlefield. The few people who were knocked down had just climbed back to their feet. They turned around and looked at unsworn sword. Seeing their leader slightly shaking his head, they immediately understood his intention and stepped back, leaving a large space for Gu Fei. Only one this time? The 5 people on the other side took a glance at Gu Fei, then shouted towards the main formation. No one responded, which meant that they agreed. After taking a closer look at Gu Fei, the other side frowned and mumbled, "Another mage." It seemed that they weren't interested in fighting against mages. Gu Fei didn't answer and continued walking forward. The other side obviously didn't plan to fight with numbers like Unhindered did. Only one person stood out to fight, and it was the one who kicked Feng Xing. At this time, Gu Fei suddenly put the sword he had been carrying in his hand back into his pocket and went up to fight empty-handed. "What the hell is he doing now?" shouted Yutian Shinming. This group of acquaintances knew that Gu Fei's great damage came from his equipment. Without equipment, Gu Fei's magic damage was a shame to mages. Yutian Shinming's shout was very loud, but Gu Fei turned a deaf ear to it. With 2 steps, he approached the other side, then suddenly cupped his hands and bowed to him. This action startled the other side, but before he could think, Gu Fei had already swept his leg over. This person had been in low spirits ever since he saw that Gu Fei was a mage. Seeing that the mage didn't attack and was instead getting closer and closer to him, he began to mutter to himself. Everyone knew that mages were mainly long-range attackers. Only when Gu Fei walked up to him and suddenly bowed to him did this guy come back to his senses. Then he saw this kick flash and the person hurriedly ducked to avoid it. Just as he was about to take the opportunity to counterattack, he didn't think that this kick would actually fall at the same time he bent down, chopping at his neck. This guy was immediately at a loss. It turned out that the other side's kick wasn't a sweep, but a chop. Didn't this mean that bending down to avoid it was the same as giving his opening to the other side? Just as he was regretting it, he suddenly saw his vision go black. Gu Fei's right leg chopped at him, followed by a small jump with his left leg, and a knee had already hit the bridge of the person's nose. This person couldn't help but lean backwards. Before he landed, Gu Fei twisted his body in the air and turned his back to him, but the right leg that was swung over just happened to kick this person's chest. This person staggered back a few steps. Gu Fei himself was also sent flying, but he landed steadily. Among the 5 people, one of them had already shouted out in surprise, "9 revolutions chain? That was a 9 revolutions chain, right?" Gu Fei smiled and said, "Don't you guys practice the puncturing kick fist?" As soon as these words came out, the 5 people immediately widened their eyes, because what Gu Fei said wasn't wrong at all. The 9 revolutions chain referred to the 9 sets of kicks that could be mutually matched, so it was called the 9 revolutions chain. The chain referred to the 9 sets of kicks, because any one of them was a step and a kick linked together. Apart from this, the left and right feet alternated, so the full name of this set of kicks should be 9 revolutions chain Mandarin duck kick. These people were familiar with it, so they casually shortened it to 9 revolutions chain. But saying that they practiced the puncturing kick fist wasn't wrong, because this 9 revolutions chain was the oldest set of the puncturing kick fist. After the person who had been kicked back by Gu Fei stabilized his footing, he looked at his health, as if he hadn't been attacked at all. He also understood that Gu Fei was a mage, so his damage was limited. Moreover, he was still wearing equipment, so Gu Fei's empty kick couldn't even break through his defense. But this was the judgment of a player. From the perspective of an expert, he had just been utterly defeated. The first kick wasn't a sweep, but a split kick. These were originally 2 completely different kicking techniques, but he actually misjudged them. Of course, he understood that it wasn't a momentary blur, but the opponent's feint was too fast and too real. He easily fell for it, and even more accurately calculated how he would dodge. In the eyes of an outsider, he was afraid that he had obediently stuffed his head under the opponent's feet. Thinking of this person's face turned red. And with their habits, they would immediately think. If this was a real competition, they would have directly sold their vitals to the opponent. If this split kick came down, even if he didn't directly faint, his eyes would definitely go black for a while. Then, a knee to the face and a leg to the heart. This person thought like this, one hand covering his nose, the other hand covering his chest, as if he couldn't hold on any longer. This person isn't simple. This person said very seriously. But, is he really using the 9 revolutions chain? Why do I feel like it doesn't look like it? Another person muttered, Hey, how can you learn martial arts by rote? You need to have some imagination to adapt to the situation. Gu Fei immediately criticized this person. Is that so? Then let me experience it. This person had already jumped out of the formation and waved his hand, sending a punch towards Gu Fei's face. Gu Fei dodged to the side, and this person followed up with a kick. Gu Fei took half a step back to avoid it. This person's foot landed on the ground, followed by another foot, and Gu Fei took another step back. This person looked even more vigorous and couldn't wait to get ready to kick again. But just as his front foot had just landed on the ground and his hind leg had already been lifted in the air, suddenly his front ankle was gently pushed in the direction of the force he was about to launch. This made him immediately lose his balance. Pa! His third foot also kicked out, but it kicked into the sky, and at the same time he had fallen on his back. Butterfly knot. I wanted to make the best of a mistake, but still, in response to the voice of the masses, Luya City was renamed to Sunset City. Chapter 371. As the saying goes, the onlookers see the game more clearly than the players. Before the fallen brother could figure out what was going on, all the spectators, including Sword Without Oath and the others, saw it clearly. However, in their eyes, Gu Fei just quickly kicked his opponent to the ground, but in the eyes of the experts, they felt that Gu Fei's timing was extremely precise. It was as if he had already predicted where his opponent would step, and his foot had already kicked there. From the looks of it, it was as if his opponent had taken the initiative to send his foot right in front of his foot. Your jade ring steps are too precise, Gu Fei said calmly to the fallen brother. The brother on the ground immediately understood. He stepped on the jade ring steps and used the Mandarin duck kick, but he only took 3 steps before Gu Fei read his steps. When he continued to step on the 4th step, Gu Fei already knew where his foot would land. Naturally, the more precise his steps were, the more unlucky he was, and he was caught red-handed by Gu Fei. He did not lose much health from this fall, but at this time, the battle between them was no longer a battle of life and death like in the game, but a contest of skills. This person was thinking the same thing as the previous one. If it was in real life and he was swept down, and the opponent was right in front of him, with his skills, he could easily crush his head with a kick. If he lost, he would also lose. After this person got up from the ground, he stared blankly at Gu Fei and retreated without saying a word. If they still couldn't tell that Gu Fei was very tall and powerful, then they wouldn't dare to pretend to be experts anymore. There was no doubt that the person in front of them was also a person who practiced martial arts like them. Just by looking at the few professional terms that he casually said and the confused looks on the faces of the people around him, they knew that the two of them were no longer in the same world. The remaining 3 people who had not appeared looked at each other, and then looked at the 2 people who had already suffered a loss. Like Sword Without Oath, the 5 people nodded slightly, and the 3 people walked out side by side. This time, they were extremely serious. The 3 people who came up together cupped their fists and bowed to Gu Fei. Please advise us. Please advise me. After Gu Fei cupped his fists in return, the 3 of them immediately rushed forward and stood in a triangular formation. They slowly circled around Gu Fei, looking for a good opportunity to strike. Gu Fei was surrounded by 3 people, but he was still calm and composed, with the demeanor of a master. Seeing that, the people in Cloud City who wanted to help finally gave up on this idea. At this point, they could finally understand why Gu Fei was so strong. He was the same kind of person as the 100 Battles mercenary group, and his level was obviously higher. If these people were small gangsters, then he was a big gangster. If these people were from the martial arts school, then he was at least the owner of the martial arts school. If these people were retired soldiers, Then Gu Fei was a super excellent soldier who wanted to retire but was not allowed to. Just as everyone was letting their imaginations run wild, the three opponents suddenly shouted and charged at Gu Fei, who was in the middle of the encirclement. Some punched, some kicked, and the warrior stabbed out with the greatsword in his hand. Gu Fei just smiled. He took 2 steps to the side and twisted his body. The 3 people suddenly found that there was no target in front of them. The warrior also used the charge skill. At this time, the sword was about to stab his own people, so he quickly cancelled the skill. In addition, fearing that it was too late, he also raised the sword above his head. The tip of the sword flashed in front of his brother's eyes, and the guy was shocked into a cold sweat. Then he heard Gu Fei slowly say behind him, "The one with the sword, you're new, right?" The warrior immediately opened his mouth and didn't know what to say. He was like a child who had made a mistake and was caught. It's already very complicated for 3 people to cooperate with each other. How can a beginner like him do it with you guys? Gu Fei turned around and lectured the other 2. He then turned to the warrior and said, "The 2 over there have a very solid foundation. They're so solid that they don't know how to be flexible. You, on the other hand, are a complete mess. Do you think that using the charge skill in the game will be very powerful? Do you know that all the flaws were revealed by you? You didn't even realize that you made a mistake when you were circling in the plum blossom steps? Then you made another mistake and another 17 steps, and then you used charge. Do you still want to hit someone?" The warrior was stunned by Gu Fei's words. His head drooped lower and lower until it was almost stuffed into his pants. Gu Fei saw that he knew he was wrong and said to the other 2, "His level is completely different from yours. How can he cooperate with the 3 of you? Why don't you 2 try the 2 of you?" "The 2 of us haven't practiced the 2 of us before." The 2 of them said embarrassedly. "You haven't practiced the 2 of us and you're already practicing the 3 of us?" Gu Fei's eyes widened. The 2 of them blushed and said, "Actually, it's not really practice. We just look at the boxing manual and find it interesting. Then we walk around in private and occasionally try it in the game. Oh, it's not easy to reach this level. But you still have to practice the 2 of you first. Otherwise, you won't make any progress with the 3 of you." Gu Fei earnestly said, "Some things have to be done step by step. If you force yourself to take the step, you'll end up like the brother just now. One mistake in the plum blossom steps, and then it'll be 18 steps." When the soldier saw that Gu Fei was no longer talking about him, he raised his head. He didn't expect that Gu Fei would mention him again in the blink of an eye. He hurriedly lowered his head again, muttering to himself, "Didn't you just say 17 steps?" Unexpectedly, Gu Fei's ears were sharp. He immediately heard it and said angrily, "Including the first wrong step, isn't it exactly 18 steps? You're talking back after doing something wrong. If you weren't a beginner, I would have killed you long ago. Go back and practice your basics before coming out again." The warrior was a yes man and didn't dare to breathe loudly. Gu Fei looked at them one by one. The 5 of them didn't speak to him. Gu Fei had no choice but to use his gaze to cover all 5 of them and asked, "What other advice do you have next?" The 5 of them seemed to wake up from a dream. Only then did they realize what they were here for. They didn't expect to be beaten senseless by Gu Fei in just a few moves. They didn't dare to have any doubts about Gu Fei. Not only was this person extraordinary, but his knowledge far exceeded theirs. He was someone with a great background. The 5 of them thought about it and quickly replied, "Not for now. Come back later. Come back later." After saying that, the 5 of them had already turned around and fled. They were no different from the usual players who were beaten badly in PvP. However, the reality was that the 5 of them were abnormally full. What damage could Gu Fei's barehanded attacks do? Moreover, the last 3 of them didn't even need to be attacked by Gu Fei. He just flashed out of their circle and a verbal lecture was enough to defeat them. This kind of defeat was truly convincing. "Where are you going? When are you coming back? Bring more experts." Gu Fei was still shouting at the 5 of them at the top of his lungs. It wasn't clear whether the 5 of them heard him or not. In any case, they ran away as fast as they could. When Gu Fei turned around again, the players in Cloud City were closely watching him. They all ran away. Sigh. Gu Fei awkwardly explained to everyone. All of you, Kung Fu? Obviously, everyone was not concerned about whether or not they could run away. They just suddenly realized that if they wanted to become stronger in the game, other than getting equipment to level up and farming skills, there seemed to be another way. Moreover, this method was very powerful. It could create a near-invincible superhuman like Gu Fei. Does this guy really know some bullshit martial arts? The Han family's young master mumbled. In fact, these people who were most familiar with Gu Fei already knew that he was different from the others. Moreover, Gu Fei also bluntly said that he was a kung fu expert. However, in this era, kung fu was so insignificant that it could be ignored. In reality, no one had the chance to experience what kung fu was. Most of their understanding came from various kinds of flashy literature and movies, as well as various kinds of kung fu performances. Those kinds of novels and movies were known to be fake. The nature of those performances was actually not much different from gymnastics. This kind of kung fu with real combat effectiveness was very difficult for ordinary people to see. Now that they had personally experienced such a miracle, who would want to miss it? After a moment of astonishment and silence, suddenly the crowd rushed towards Gu Fei, waving their hands and shouting, "Brother Qianli, teach me, teach me!" This was a scene that Gu Fei was very happy to see, but he also knew why these people were suddenly so enthusiastic. If they thought that people who practiced kung fu would only learn kung fu without asking for a reason, then they were wrong. Don't forget that kung fu was basically a technique that taught people how to hurt or even kill people. Saying that it was self-defense was just self-comfort. Self-defense was also based on the method of attacking the opponent. Kung fu was full of offensive power from the beginning to the end. Therefore, although Gu Fei usually seemed to be eager for everyone to practice kung fu, in fact, when someone really wanted to ask him for advice, he absolutely had to first understand the other party's intentions and character. Take the savior of cowards, for example. Although he started out as a bad gang in Moonlit Night City, Gu Fei could easily see that this person had a very simple personality and was definitely not a bad person. Teaching kung fu to such a person was completely reassuring, so he carefully taught him the seven-sided mantis fist. As it turned out, Gu Fei was right. The savior of cowards was originally a person with some foundation, and with Gu Fei's guidance, his strength was not something that ordinary people could deal with. However, this guy was still naive and silly. He never said that he bullied others with his kung fu, and he did not even have the desire to deliberately encounter some injustice to test his kung fu. Even Gu Fei was ashamed of his inferiority. If he had this level of kung fu, he would not have appeared in the parallel world. This large group of people in front of him had all discovered the secret of Gu Fei's strength, and all of them looked sincere and wanted to ask Gu Fei for advice. But at this time, who knew what they would do after learning the skill? Before figuring this out, Gu Fei would not casually teach them. However, at this time, everyone's enthusiasm was really high. Seeing that it was unlikely that he would even have a chance to explain, Gu Fei could only temporarily avoid it. After a teleportation, he pulled away from the crowd, turned around, and ran. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.